Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is October 16th, Monday. Let's hop in here. Over the weekend, I said this on the last stream, I was going to be just trying to program my WebSocket internet controlled on-air light. It's a little LED light toy, effectively, that says on air, that by default would just turn on when you flipped a switch or when you plugged it in. Best case scenario, by itself, the on air light works if you would plug in a wireless remote to the power outlet, one of the cheapest, like 400 megahertz style wireless remote to turn on and off the outlet. What I'm doing is adding a chip inside that will connect actually through your Wi-Fi to your OBS software and check to see if you actually are recording or streaming, and then if you are actually recording or streaming, it will at that point light up, and if you're not recording and streaming both, then it will turn off. Important to program it specifically for that difference, because otherwise you will make a very common programming mistake of having it turn off as soon as you stop recording, but you may still be streaming, or as soon as you stop streaming. As far as paused on recording and things like that, I won't even bother programming anything for that. That's a weird enough scenario where if you were paused, like I do it a lot when I have to run to the bathroom, but I'm still streaming, the on-air lights probably still should be on at that point anyways. So that's what I did over the weekend, and yeah, it's been definitely more of a journey than a final destination experience so far. The problem inherently is this would be like 3 lines of code to just get connected to OBS, particularly with its kind of unique roll your own security system. WebSockets inherently don't really have a protocol for security as much as they just rely on open, well, the security you would have normally with an HTTPS encrypted SSL, open SSL type connection. So, like, inherently, the right way to roll this and program a client would be to have the server also work that way, and since OBS does not work that way, they really are making their own modification on it, which leads to the inherent lack of security that it has. It's probably not a big deal, but I could certainly see if you exposed OBS to the internet, which I would heavily discourage, that somebody would eventually just find that that port was open on your router and figure out how to connect to your OBS, and then you would be in the middle of a stream and somebody would stop your stream or screw with it in some other way. Now, I don't think you could screw with it too many different ways, but you could definitely screw with it. And if you're in the middle of making a video and you're a big time YouTuber, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so inherently you want a firewall, and you would want a firewall that would block anybody from getting in and connecting to OBS outside of your local area network. And if you were going to try and connect an on-air light the right way, because the chip is just not that powerful. I'm already at platinum, so the question now becomes, do we risk it and keep going halfway through the month, which I guess we have to, don't we? I guess we're gonna try and make it to Diamond here. Like first time in a long time that we've actually had enough time and no festival popping up. Like ideally, if you're gonna have the on-air like light up at a different facility, suppose you were a recording studio and you had like connections that way. Even in that case, there's probably a better way to do this that I'll talk about in a second. But you would want the on-air light to connect to a router that has a travel router, which they sell these now, that would just connect via VPN to your main local area network. That way it would encrypt everything into the internet and nobody could see what you're doing, because inherently this connection is not encrypted. The data that is being passed through is totally susceptible, like any non-encrypted data, to a man-in-the-middle attack. Now, OBS does send a salt and a challenge code, but the salt is pretty much the same for the same IP MAC address. I'm sure it might be different for different IP addresses within the local area network, but the salt is the same. And then that creates the annoyance here where it wants me to take the password, add the salt to it at the end, hash that solution into a SSH, no, not SSH, SHA-256 hash. Then it wants you to do base encode 64, which would then spit out a different number that you then add the base encode 64 secret that you got to the challenge, adding the challenge at the end, which the challenge changes every time, and it's really the only thing that changes every time. And then it wants you to SHA-256 hash it again, and then it wants you to base encode 64 it again, and then it wants you to send that final solution of doing all of that, which is not competition. It's not free as far as CPU cycles. When you're talking a tiny little microcontroller, it's not super slow either, but it is not fast on the controller I have, because the controller I have does not have any circuitry built into it at all for cryptography. So it is just using the basic CPU processing power to do all of that, which is not as fast as it could be. And where the man-in-the-middle attack could happen there is very easily. Like, all you have to do is intercept the challenge, and you could brute force passwords with the salt and the challenge over and over again, but you probably wouldn't even have to be in the middle to do that. You could just brute force challenges, passwords non-stop. There's no real fail to ban like activity where if you fail a password connection multiple times, OBS blocks you or times you out or even slows you down in any way. It doesn't even really... Whoops. That was a mistake. It doesn't even really report back when the password fails in its own logs. It just says the handshake timed out. So yeah, you can just brute force passwords forever on that. There's no encryption there at all. But worse than that, I'm pretty sure, just thinking off the top of my head, if you just monitor what is being sent, you can pretty much get the password anyways, because you can de-encode a base 64 into a hash, and you can get the salt and the challenge if you're monitoring the network, and you can de-hash something back to its original form. So there's literally nothing in this security if you're monitoring the middle. In fact, it's probably too much security for its own good, since it's not really doing any kind of encrypted connections. Honestly, for as much as it feels like it's adding security, it's really on the exact same level if I just, in an unencrypted connection, just sent a plain text password. Because the salt and the challenge that the OBS software is sending is in plain text, as far as I can tell. Like, can't imagine that there's any way that it isn't. Which inherently just highlights the problem of growing your own security, but whatever. I mean, inherently, without the password authentication, which you can just by default not have it enabled in OBS, but you might as well. But having a small password might give the appearance of security, or stop a few people from messing with your OBS settings while you're recording or streaming. Which it is not a particularly high priority target anyways. You'd have to get pretty creative, I imagine. You'd have to... I don't know if through WebSockets you could change internal settings, such as like what channel you're streaming to, which could do something, certainly. If all of a sudden they could get you to start streaming on a secret channel so they could spy on what you're doing on your computer, then I could see the value in that as far as hacking somebody. But if you can't do that, then best case scenario, you could get somebody to start streaming when they weren't planning to, and then they would just be streaming to their regular channel, and maybe spy on them because of that. The bigger danger would certainly be to open and install OBS on somebody's computer that just doesn't use it in the first place, and then you could spy on them non-stop. But if you can install the software, you could probably install better spyware software than that. So, anyways, this is mostly rambling and not really even talking about the programming problems that I was having, which is just that the software for like standard Arduino C, not C++ code is not very well supported. Like, there's just not that many people doing anything that complicated on it. In a lot of ways, Arduino really is focused on trying to teach kids their babies' first programs. They're not trying to really help people make like in-user finalized products. So there's just something in the software where one of the commands just doesn't send the text. You'll type in print and it will turn the print into a number instead of being a string. It just doesn't handle strings correctly, which is crazy, certainly. And so I spent all of Saturday not even trying to do the encryption stuff. I spent all of Sunday doing the encryption stuff. The password stuff. It's not encryption. It's just a password challenge, authentication stuff. But I spent all of Saturday just trying to get it to connect and get the handshake right. Which, in a lot of ways, this is working on the most difficult thing first, because the rest of it is actually going to be fairly easy. It's not that hard to get the signal that you're recording or streaming and be done with it. In fact, it's going to be relatively stupid easy to get all of that done. This whole project, theoretically, stupid easy. Of course, that's the downfall of most programmers, is that they think their program is going to be stupid easy, and then they start running into the little minutia of it in the mud and the struggle. And particularly with Arduino code, there's just not header files and things like that. Like, ideally, there would just be a header file called OBS WebSocket that you would be able to import, and there is one, but it's just not for Arduino, and it just wouldn't work. In part because that base 64 encoding just doesn't exist in Arduino by default, and WebSockets don't really exist in Arduino by default, so you're having to use like bare SSL is what I'm using to get base 64 and SHA 256 header file to get SHA. So it's two header files and two code written by different people that you're hoping you can get to connect and work with each other, but you're not 100% certain on. Well, I'm pretty certain I've gotten it to work. Part of it also is just the format, because it wants to give you, by default, a less useful format of it being in characters, and then you could read it like a human, when it actually needs to be in the hash needs to actually be in bytes that a computer can read, which means I was for a long time just getting it to look right on the screen, but it was actually completely wrong for what it was trying to do to actually process the data. Representing the information as a hexadecimal code in a character format makes it look right, but is actually wrong. So yeah, a lot of boring programming. That's what I've been doing over the weekend, and I definitely have some fear that I'm going to be working on this project for way too long over this next week, and not making any recording or scheduling any recordings, and just falling further and further behind. Like, it feels like this time of year really does seem to be when my brain particularly wants to switch on into programming mode and less video game playing mode, which is weird, certainly, because you'd think it would be the exact opposite case, where there would be much more hype and focus on playing video games during this time. Although inherently the hype and focus around playing video games this time for most people, I imagine, is because they're getting new games, or they're working their way towards Christmas gifts and they're burning through backlogs, or they're getting early Christmas gifts, which isn't a terrible thought. Yeah, if you're a parent and you gave like one video game at the beginning of their school holiday, fall, Christmas break, just to keep them busy, that wouldn't be a terrible way to go about it. But yeah, I am concerned that I'm gonna go in the wrong direction, certainly. And spend too much time programming, since I've already spent too much time programming my macro before this. I'm also just in general concerned that this is going to be a huge waste of time. I really do want this to work, first and foremost, but secondly, I want this to actually be a viable product and see it all the way through and have some kind of small Etsy style web shop. Now, on that thought, I suppose it's realistic to say I doubt I'm going to become a millionaire on this idea, even if it does go all the way through and succeed. I think you have a decent chance of making a few $100s in the first year, at most. But a few $100s would be a few $100s. One of the biggest problems, though, certainly is that the economy of scale is going to eventually just screw you, like one way or the other. In the beginning, it's going to screw me because the price of the on-air sign is going to be ridiculously high. Then it's going to screw me once I say, hey, I can buy like 100 of these units and have them in stock. It's going to screw me, particularly on time too, as it's just going to become a limiting factor on just how many of these devices can I solder together, the solder points, or flash the circuit chips on. It very quickly can become a full-time job. At which point you either do the full-time job yourself, or you hire somebody, or the mistake that a lot of people do is you send it over to China to be done, then China steals your product completely, and you're out of the market. Somebody stealing your product completely as an idea in general is going to be a big issue. Somebody claiming they already invented it, somebody actually have already invented it and just done a really poor job of advertising it to the point where I didn't see it. Patents and that nonsense can certainly screw you too, as you're just trying to get a product developed and out there. And if everything even goes perfectly, then you still have this desire at some point to want to scale up, and as soon as you scale up, that may be the entire saturation of the market. And for my own protection, I can't really just be open source about things, and I have to keep the code as secret as possible, even if I would personally think the code is somewhat simplistic anyways. Which that too creates a weird situation where you're having a product that's based on other products being added together, which is true for a lot of products, and then you're also having code added to that product that is your proprietary code, but the danger of that leaking out is fairly high. There isn't, in these devices, ways to flash something and 100% guarantee that somebody can't just steal the code off the chip even if they wouldn't they wouldn't have the source code with all the nicely written variables, they would still more than likely have everything they would need. Okay. So yeah, for the rest of the week, I'd imagine that's what I'm going to be talking about, so I probably don't need to talk about it too much more. I also am still just playing on my phone. I got over another hump on Memento Mori, so I was able to make a little bit more progress on the main storyline there. I read a full strategy guide just to see if there's something I was missing, and for the most part I wasn't missing anything, but there was one thing I was doing that was effectively wasting a few gems of the premium currency, and so I should stop doing that. There's a rush mode in the story mode that tempts you to use 30 gems to rush a second time per day. 30 gems means in 10 days you could do another pull, and since pulling characters is in most gacha games the most important thing, focusing on that and not wasting gems is important. I probably have wasted a few gems in other ways too. But overall I think I've done fine. Memento Mori is very weird in the fact that its collection of characters, while it's celebrating its 1-year anniversary, is not really that high. It's a decent amount for 1 year. It's definitely more than 12, so it's not like they just put out one new character per month. But compared to Destiny Child at the end of its 5th or 6th year when it ended, like Memento Mori in 5 or 6 years is highly unlikely to have the hundreds upon hundreds of characters that Destiny Child. At least Destiny Child on a monthly basis was usually releasing at least 2 or 3 new characters. Which does allow Memento Mori certainly to focus more on the characters it does have, and it really tries to make all those characters important. They've done an amazing job, really, of making every character important. There really are no F-list D-tier characters in the entire game, because something is valuable in each character. They are either one of 5 sorcerers or one of 5 green characters, and then there are ways in the game, if not now, there will be ways in which you'll have to make a team with all green characters or a team with all sorcerers. I haven't seen one with all sorcerers, but there definitely already is a case where you have to make teams with all green characters, red characters, yellow characters, and blue characters. So, yeah. It'll be a long while, frankly, until they get to the point where there's just absolute garbage characters. And even if there were garbage characters, and most gacha games there are, it doesn't matter, because there's enough people that won't have a complete collection, or won't have a fully upgraded complete collection, that it doesn't matter. Somebody out there will have a need to use a character. Tinka Fuma, the adult gacha game, which is too adult really for its own good, is still going, but it's kind of in a bit of a lull. I think in the next couple days it will add. Yeah, I think in the next couple days it's going to add a new event, and then in that next event we will okay. If I was going to use this, I'd have to evolve all of those up. Yeah. I'm still playing Star Trek Lower Decks. They're doing their Halloween event a little bit early, but noticeably none of the other games I'm playing have really a Halloween event at all. If they're going to do a Halloween event, they're going to do it for maybe a week or so. But otherwise, Lower Decks is incredibly boring, and it just doesn't have content in it. And I would imagine Lower Decks itself is probably a year old, and they have just not bothered to add enough content. There really needs to be a whole new gameplay mode added to it. Unless there's just something, once you get all the way through the entire narrative, that you can start the whole stories all the way through again. But even at that gameplay mechanic of upgrading buildings and waiting is pretty boring. And then 7 Mortal Sins Ecstasy, I'm actually getting overwhelmed by, as far as just, it has a lot it wants you to do, but I'm not particularly that interested in focusing on the story. In a lot of ways, if I could just burner 7 Mortal Sins and install that at a different time and play it at a different time, it probably would be better. Put my full focus on it. And there is something I think somewhat irritating around 7 Mortal Sins, in that it really needs an uncensored version of the game for it to make sense. And even then, since it is a lewd gacha game, it's still not quite there, I think. Yeah, but that's pretty much like all the things I'm playing on my phone. Sorry. Thought I heard somebody honking outside. Checking my cameras to see if somebody is out there honking for some reason. So it definitely is a case that Memento Mori has so much polish to it. Honestly, it has too much polish to it. The music, the laments are great. They don't play back perfectly, but they play back, and they really are earworms that I just love to hear every time I jump into the game. And then I'm jumping into the game 4 or 5 times a day, which is way too often, and often just coming back and finding that there's nothing to do because its stamina system just slows you down enough. I also feel like Memento Mori, as I'm delving deeper into the strategy, maybe has a whole system there where it is a little bit deceptive on which characters you should pick. While in general, I just said there are no bad characters. There are definitely better characters. And some have effects that seem to be a lot more obvious than others, such as attacking multiple enemies as their skill, or protecting other characters as their skill. There's one called Merlin I just got that's fairly low level, but if I could get it to be higher level, I would probably have it in the team just to protect other characters. But the way it sorts the characters and suggests the characters makes it seem like Merlin at the moment is not a good candidate to be added to the team. And I think it kind of is in some scenarios. There are just also a lot of scenarios where I think maybe switching up your team quite a bit and very often makes a lot of sense. There is also randomization in the battles in Memento Mori, where there really isn't any randomization in most other gacha games. So you can very easily, and this is basically the strategy guide suggestion, just play to the main story to the point where you get the skip button, and once you get to the skip button, you can fight somebody, hit the skip button, and even if you happen to fail, then just try again and hit the skip button, and do that for like 10 times before you even start to actually watch a fight go down to figure out why you're failing before you even put any kind of strategy into it at all, because there is just a decent chance that you will, on the 10th try, on the 20th try, on the 30th try, win randomly if you're close. And certainly that's how I got past the most recent difficulty spike, or difficulty plateau is probably much more accurate of a description for Memento Mori. It's just by trying over and over again. I also finished watching Solar Opposites. Boy, by the end of that 4th season on Hulu, did they just not care about the alien characters, the main characters of that game. They are desperately bouncing between two side stories, the Wall side story and now the neighbor side story, getting shot into space and going on his own adventure. They just actively kind of are, I guess, looking for spin-offs or looking for something else to say, to the point where I think pretty much the last episode, if not the second last episode, they had the aliens and Solar Opposites turn into humans and just like pitch the idea, hey, what if these guys were just humans the whole time, aliens that looked more humanoid. I feel like in Rick and Morty they probably jokingly introduce a new character, like there's going to be a spin-off, knowing that there never would be. Whereas in Solar Opposites, I think Dan Harmon is actively trying to make pitches to make spin-off things. And inherently that is always a problem too, is that you have creators of beloved things that succeeded probably on luck and just timing, such as Futurama, And then they try to make a Futurama in a fantasy version for Netflix, and I think it was called Disenchanted or something, and it totally just didn't work. But yeah, for 4 seasons, it really is pretty terrible. Solar Opposites is. There's this newer Fox animation, I think, show called Crapopolis. It's that kind of in a mythical Greece time frame, which it again is really just doing the same gimmicks over and over again. Honestly, I guess probably all the animated comedies have been probably played out to death. But I think the unique part about Crapopolis is it has British voice actors doing the voices, so maybe it's a way of getting around the strike somewhat. If you have all the animation happening outside of the United States and all the voice acting happening outside of the United States. So yeah, I think that's pretty much the entirety of the accountability section, and that's how it's going to be in general, is that we're just not going to, I'm not going to have much to say. I've been being lazy, not making any pre-recorded footage, working on programming, and just in general watching a lot, way too much TV. Is it my turn? Oh. I'm going through my Twitter feed to see if there's any new news to talk about, and then we'll start talking about the news. Honestly, there could be a decent amount of news that I've missed. In general, because I don't really remember what I don't really remember what I last talked about on Friday, and just it's been a long weekend of banging my brain against programming. Also, my macro, for some reason, this today did not want to run. In part, it messed up because my rotating encrypted DNS seemed to rotate to a new server with AdGuard home and just DNS encryption. So things like Steam logged me out, and it's just time to log back in anyways. No big deal there, but then the macro just didn't want to run. As far as new games, what's this gonna do? Just go ahead and stop this card from doing whatever it wants to do, because I just am tired of being prompted. So we have a GameDeveloper.com article here that says Epic has launched its first run initiative, debuting now on Epic program. Epic is offering developers more revenue to fill the Epic Game Store with new releases and back catalog titles. Weren't they doing that already though? So, an opt-in exclusive program that allows third-party developers and publishers to capture 100% of its revenue generated during their first 6 months on the Epic Game Store. Which, wow, that sounds like a really great deal. The problem that this constantly is going to happen, though, when the exclusivity period closes, it's 88% and 12%, which is still probably a better cut than Steam, but it's going to be a better cut on a smaller number of sales, and even the 100% in the first 6 months is just another example of, do you want 100% on $1,000, or do you want 88%, or let's just make it easy, 70%? Let's just assume that's the cut on Steam. It's probably closer to the truth. On $10,000, like, because the difference there may very well be a factor of 10, if not higher. You would get $7,000 of revenue if you sold $10,000 of gross income. Or, yeah, you would net $7,000 on $10,000 of gross revenue if you sold on Steam, versus having net $1,000 for the first 6 months on the Epic Game Store. Of course, that's kind of the only thing that Epic can do to try and grow, is that they don't have any better features to offer, and they don't have a larger customer base to offer, so all they can do is cut the price, and inherently when you're cutting the price, you've run out of other ideas, because you never want to cut the price. Meanwhile, the Epic Game Store isn't really going to be bringing in a lot of new people with this offer because of Unity. People either would have published their games on the Epic Game Store, or they wouldn't. The two aren't really connected that much. And it still would probably make a lot of sense to make a game with an open source engine like Godot engine and not have to pay a royalty fee to the Unreal Engine, which is also owned by Epic, on top of selling on the Epic Game Store. Which I think they already had a program that sort of helped out there if you made an Unreal Engine game and then put it on the Epic Game Store. But I'm not 100% sure. I guess really what this offering is this is the offering that they were doing one by one with game companies that they wanted to no, I guess it is a different offering. They definitely have been one by one courting game companies to give away as far as their free games, and they almost certainly have been courting companies to by giving certain companies better deals, better cuts. So this is probably just the same kind of deal they would have given to somebody like Roblox, or that they would have given to themselves for Fortnite, just now being available for everybody. Now, I imagine there are still registration fees. I don't think that this is now the cheaper place than paying $100 to list your game via Steam Direct. I imagine that's still the case. Some amount of money kind of needs to be necessary. If Epic Games just said anybody for free could list their games on the Epic Games Store, then the Epic Games Store would become full of new games, certainly, but it would be full of broken, entirely garbage games, with also not having reviews and systems and even the mediumly acceptable algorithm that the Steam Store has. Apparently, a 4-player co-op is coming to Pokemon Go. Players will share progress towards in-game challenges. That's an interesting idea. The question here is, can that mean you can make kind of a 4-player guild of people who are in different places? Or does it mean you have to have four people in the exact same location? Because I could certainly see like somebody with 4 cousins who all play Pokemon Go but happen to be spread across different states, different cities, different countries in the world, and them all wanting to feel like they're working together or working to potentially even get certain location exclusive characters for each of them. Just waiting for this guy to see if he plays this last card. Guess the question now is, can you win this turn? Really don't have that much of a choice here. We can do this. We can do this. I guess what I could have possibly done is activated this a second time, and then that would have given me 4 things on the ground. Activate all of these things. I imagine from an outsider looking in that Pokemon Go can't be that popular as it once was. It just doesn't seem like that would make sense with the whole pandemic slowing it down and with everything else going on. And it just in general being an older game. And a weird augmented reality game too. Although it is a Pokemon experience, so I wouldn't be surprised if it does just hang on and stay around forever. There's really no reason why it would shut down without something better to replace it. Video Games Chronicle says that City Skylines 2 is going to launch with performance issues. Paradox has warned players. We still think for the long term the project releasing now is the best way forward. Which that is an interesting that is an interesting claim, certainly, to try and make. I didn't even know this card did that. Yeah, I don't don't know what the value of bringing that to the field was. Alright, well, I'm just going to go ahead and activate this just in case I need to activate spells. It's an interesting thought, certainly. Should game companies warn their players if a game is going to have performance issues and still release? No, I don't think so. I think, well, you could applaud the honesty, certainly, on this. Originally, there is just a precedent that it sets that I just can't agree with, and I just don't want to live in a world where the gaming community thinks it's acceptable to increasingly release unfinished products and then warn the players and expect no backlash or a lesser amount of backlash. And we shouldn't fall for it the first time, even if it is a level of honesty this time, because it will very quickly become just contrived the second time. It's probably contrived the first time. Planet Pathfinder here. Almost certainly he was planning on tributing that to get a field spell. This game, Wizard with a Gun, kind of surprise launched by Devolver Digital, which Devolver Digital, I'm not sure they've ever really done a great job publishing or announcing games as a publisher, but then also all of their games are very weird games, so it's not like if they did put a ton of traditional advertisement behind a game with Wizard with a Gun that it's likely going to sell any better. Wizard with a Gun has already hit the top sellers on Steam, featured and recommended, which inherently they said this was curated in things. Yeah, and I think Valve almost certainly is getting influenced in one way or another as far as what they want to promote and put on the recommended. Let's go ahead and counter this. Also, guys, doing some crazy stuff here. Not seen this before. Maybe I should have canceled. Alright, let's see how this goes. Probably should have activated this card first. this card stops you from being able to play certain cards. Having to play a little bit more cautiously on this. My goal is to be able to attack directly. My hope is that I can then destroy everything. Ultimate hope is that this would just totally destroy his strategy. Probably putting that down there doesn't matter. There we go. Bring out Zeus for safety. And then let's just go ahead and activate this now. That's going to give him basically nothing he can play with next turn. GameDeveloper.com says that Minecraft has crossed the 300 million sales ahead of the 15th anniversary. The Blocky Sandbox is still delivering the goods for Mojang and Microsoft. I did see that they are working on... I'm just going to activate this. They're working on clay terracotta pots is a new feature. There's not particularly anything that you can do with the clay terracotta pots, though it definitely feels like they're just trying to create something very similar to the clay pots in a Zelda game. You can fill a clay terracotta pot with up to one stack of one specific item. As soon as you put one item in it, you can only put that kind of item in it going forward. But then to get items out of it, you have to either use a hopper or hit it with like a snowball or something and break it. Or break it with your fist or sword. Which definitely begs a question as far as what could you really do with that. And I'm not sure there really is too much to do with it. It's not really better than, say, a hopper being full of like pieces of paper named a specific way so that it has a filler paper in it, which is what you would have done before this point to accomplish the same thing. In fact, that hopper concept is better. for several reasons. It also doesn't consistently give you like a readout of how many things are in the pot, which maybe there's room for improvement there. And there might be some other stuff, but I didn't see any other stuff as far as the most recent snapshots of Minecraft. It definitely doesn't feel like they're adding some like amazing new game-breaking concepts. And it has been quite a while, frankly, since Minecraft did have anything amazing or new released for it. The mansions, I guess, are your closest thing that you could focus on. Is some new structures, some new biomes, maybe some new characters that maybe don't matter that much. Trying to think of ways that I might be able to destroy the trap cards. See, my fear here is I'm going to put all this effort into this. And then the trap card is going to activate. Nope. It did not. Well then, for safety's sake, we'll just go to Zeus. I know that is less damage than is needed to win. GameDeveloper.com has yet another obituary. This time it's Yoshitaka Tamaki, the Shining series character artist, passed away at age 55. Beyond his work as a character and monster artist in the Shining games, Tamaki wrote and directed titles such as Landstalker and I think that's FEDA, The Emblem of Justice. All these sound very much like Japanese games that probably didn't come over to the West. And almost certainly there have been Japanese people who have died and they just have not been mentioned or had obituaries given to them even though they deserved it. And a lot of that certainly is Western mainstream video game journalists just not being that good, but a lot of that almost certainly is a fact of Japanese society just not really trying to promote, or Japanese companies not trying to promote their workers or give them any credit. There is also something to be said about some of these older creators being animators in a very different style from what you would consider anime style now, or Japanese animation. Very much more fantasy based, muscular, anthropomorphically more, anatomically more accurate, smaller eyes compared to the giant eyes we often see, less round eyes in particular, more simplistic fabric and clothing and armor and weapons by modern standards. Let's go ahead and not activate this time. Weirdly, they've got this guy in kind of what probably would have been more traditional style of clothing in the fantasy time, is that you would just have clothing hanging down your shoulders and being like a dress effectively for the men and the women, and then a belt just cinching it in the middle there. Considerably less detail and such, and definitely of a different color palette, less bright colors, less variety in the colors. This is definitely a pencil sketch from the looks of it. And that's true for like Disney animation too, is that they are basically having to recolor and change things when they remaster some of the Sleeping Beauty things. Is that they're expanding the color palette and choosing different colors, brighter colors, to make it feel more in line with the HD color that you would see on HD monitors compared to a standard definition color palette, or early PC color palettes where there was just a limited number of colors that you could have used in the animation software if you were using animation software, or if you're hand drawing something, you might as well just limit yourself to a certain number of colors. Even physically drawing and coloring things in the past has evolved quite a bit nowadays, because there's just better there's just better development, more consistent development of inks and colors, as it were, too. Like, if you were going to a arts and crafts store in the 70s, almost certainly they'd have a shelf of maybe 100 paints, where now there's probably 600 to 700 paints you can get as far as different colors go. And since colors are constructs in the minds of people, it's totally impossible that we will just continuously have more colors for each eye. Video Games Chronicles has this article: Analog's new console is going to be able to play Nintendo 64 games in 4K. The Analog 3D launches in 2024. This is this an FPGA? Yeah. Plays games at the hardware level that in fact it's powered by a field programmable FPGA chip. So my thought here is that this probably is an FPGA that has a lot more circuitry than the last analog product, and thus you can program a Nintendo 64 emulation. You're not actually emulating as much as you're emulating the hardware. You're rebuilding the hardware. You're not even emulating the hardware. You're literally reprogramming the chip to act like the chips in the original Nintendo 64. And these are sold, particularly by Analog, as devices so that you can plug in an actual Nintendo 64 cartridge into it and play it in that way, as it's probably going to get increasingly difficult to get hands on a working original Nintendo 64. Of course, there's a lot of you can run a ROM ways around that, through firmware mods that basically the creator of the analog stuff also releases, is my understanding of the situation. So he's playing both sides. He worked for analog to do the official this can't play ROMs version, and then he releases this can play ROMs versions on the side personally. Which, yeah, I mean, who really cares? Other than Nintendo. Which, if Nintendo really cared, they would release their own device. But there is a question of cost here, certainly, because the only thing that's really bad at emulating the Nintendo 64 right now is the Raspberry Pi 4 and below. We don't know for 100% that the Raspberry Pi 5 can emulate Nintendo 64 games perfectly, but it looks like it's much more likely to emulate most Nintendo 64 games, if not all of them, fairly well, if not perfectly. But as soon as you start to get up to a computer, if you're running Dolphin emulator on like a Steam Deck, you probably can play Nintendo 64 games perfectly. If you're running Dolphin emulator on a computer of a modern time, a powerful gaming PC, you almost certainly can play Nintendo 64 games perfectly. So it does get into this mushy middle. They're mentioning here that previous analog consoles sold between $200 and $250, which is really only $100 off of what a Steam Deck is, and it's halfway towards the beginnings of a decent gaming computer. I could see maybe using analog 3D in tournaments, but even in that would be a weird exception to not using original hardware, and it would only be in Smash Brothers tournaments that at like Evo, which still Nintendo wouldn't be happy about. Otherwise, it's going to feature a Bluetooth and 2.4 gigahertz wireless connectivity of some sort. I don't know if that's for Wi-Fi connection per se, or if that's for wireless controller connection, or both. It doesn't seem like they really have any pictures for anything yet, other than this 3D controller teaser image, which looks like it's a 4-button layout, and you can see the silhouette, or I can see a silhouette of a D-pad, but it's all in shadow over here, so I couldn't tell you if there's an analog stick on any of this. 3 buttons here, and at least a left and right bump, but maybe not a left and right trigger. So it might be missing some buttons by modern controller standards in favor of just having enough buttons to play Nintendo 64 games, which even in that, if you're going through all this effort, you're probably going to want a Nintendo 64 controller. Almost certainly though, if you put a Nintendo 64 controller, an original one, in your hands, you'd realize that the level of detail on that analog stick and the just general layout and the input lag on it is, by modern standards, completely unacceptable. Like, it's not going to control well, and that layout is going to be pretty crazy. It really is only a situation that would be good for people who have been playing Nintendo 64 since it launched and never evolved past playing Nintendo 64. Video Games Chronicles has an article here. Another new Sonic game is coming next year, a leaked document is claiming, which it seems in line with Sega. Sega really doesn't have anything else to their name, so it would make some sense that they would just continuously try and make more Sonic games. Alright, with that loss, that broke my win streak. But overall, I think I've won every single game up until this point. And 3 more wins will get me to Platinum Tier 3. The only real concern would be that something coming soon would pop up out of nowhere. But we've been playing for an hour and 20 minutes or so, so it is time to just start focusing solely on the news. We've done all the daily quests. Particularly, I usually, after a stream, don't do anything for the rest of the day. It's pretty lazy, but I do need perhaps more relaxing time than most. But I think most people probably could use some more relaxing time also. But today I could certainly be programming after a stream. So the thought here, I'm not sure if it's actually proven, but through internet researchers, they're saying that the Genshin Impact actor Kevin Afghani is in Mario Wonder, playing Mario and Luigi as far as the English voice actor goes, and possibly doing the same voices It's Me Mario for the Japanese version of the game too. I don't know if there ever was a point actually where there was a Japanese voice actor for Mario. Maybe Miyamoto did it once, but yeah, I think for the most part it has just been Charles Martinet, that I think that's his name, that's been doing it for both the Japanese and the Western release voice acting. I guess it's been confirmed by this person. And generally I heard some good reception for Mario Wonder, which is good because my concern certainly was that new Super Mario Brothers Wii U was just going to be repeated and it wasn't going to be particularly good. Is there really any opinion to have in my that I have around Kevin Afghani being the new voice actor? Not really. I don't know who this is. Let's see if we can get what he voiced. Let's see. Afghani began his voice acting career in 2020 on the web short anime Penguin Red Show. Never heard of it. Voiced a humble number of characters in other similar series, and his debut video game role was Arnold in MiHoYo's Genshin Impact. So if you know what Arnold in Genshin Impact sounds like, that's probably how he's going to sound somewhat as far as Mario and Luigi. Hopefully he has a little bit of range, but most people don't have that much range, particularly video game voice actors, that they're not even really doing voices. Most of the time they're usually just doing their own voice, and that's one major thing that people complained about it as far as to the lead up to the Mario movie, is that they were doing these stunt castings of face actors to be voice actors, and then the voice actors aren't even trying to do a voice. At a certain point, we're going to have to redefine the concept of voice acting to re-emphasize the idea that you would be putting on a voice in the same way that a theatrical actor would be doing a stage voice and a different voice on stage than when talking to normal people. There is, I think, a lot of people who are making a false assumption that Kevin Afghani is going to be the new Mario every time. I wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo decides to go with the lowest bidder in every single Mario game going forward, because they kind of don't care that much, and that they would just like to save some money. Of course, this guy seems fairly new if he started in 2020, so they may have gone with the lowest bidder and gotten him under contract for a 12 game deal or something, and so we may just see him do the voice consistently for the next 20 or 30 years. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they jump over to different people. I also wouldn't be surprised if Afghani has something that gets him canceled and then Nintendo overreacts to some small cancel culture attempt on the character and then replaces them again. Mario's voice acting doesn't really matter that much unless they're going to start to actually give Mario voice and have Mario talk. And maybe if you want to flip the speculation over, maybe that was the problem with Charles Martinet. Maybe Charles Martinet wasn't really that much of a voice actor in the first place, and so in some experiments that they did internally, they tried to get him to emote and do full lines of dialogue and read entire paragraphs and have Mario actually say things. For a Mario Kids game, that's questionable they would ever tried to do that, but maybe Charles Martinet just really couldn't do much more than "It's me, Mario," and maybe Kevin Afghani can, and all of a sudden we'll see this evolution of Mario in which he starts to say more and more. It's highly unlikely that would happen though, because then Nintendo would have to write the dialogue for every language for every game they released it in, and that's just more work than they want to do for a Mario game. Mario's about running and jumping on things and platforming. It's not about Mario giving a monologue here and there, or talking to characters, or having NPCs talk. In Mario Odyssey, Mario does actually talk to a lot of NPCs. So there is a thought certainly to that idea that had Mario Odyssey had Mario actually spoken out loud in English, and then the NPCs, being cheap voice actors, spoke back in English, would that have been more acceptable for little kids? And the answer is almost certainly yes on that case. And as the cartridge sizes get bigger in Nintendo console machines, we're almost certainly going to see more room for voice acting, but there's plenty of room already for voice acting in Nintendo games and Switch games in general. Yeah, and that might be something Nintendo is feeling the pressure on, certainly too, is that when somebody goes and plays a AAA game and the characters are just speaking to each other back and forth, and then they go and play a Mario game and there's text popping up on the screen, I wouldn't be surprised if new generations of people are saying, what the heck is this? Why isn't there voice acting in this? I don't play games without voice acting. That may be a claim we start to hear more and more, is that people will say they just don't play video games without voice acting. And that will push almost every Nintendo game out the window. That's a baby game. That game has too much words in it. I don't read. I hate reading. Are these not things kids say these days? Say all the time? Or have been saying for generations? Kids hate reading in most cases. Although, in fairness, schools do a terrible job of really encouraging kids to enjoy reading by forcing them to spend almost all of their time reading stuff they don't want to read, and boring stuff at that point. Moving on, YouTube advertisers had this whole AI event thing that they're promoting as far as promoting AI. Let's see. The quote here I saw in particular: AI can help marketers get back to marketing, dreaming up ambitious ideas, and discovering new ways to connect to the audience. Marketers, the implication here I think are not a creative bunch as much as they think they are, and so AI can replace some of them and some of their job. Of course, this is Google, and Google in particular, just promoting AI in every single product and just promoting the idea of AI nonstop. if Google succeeds in their effort, they're going to make a lot of money in the short term and then ruin capitalism in the long term, as there will be just no no jobs left for humans. Which brings an interesting thing when we speak of capitalism. Bernie Sanders, I've ranted about the idea of a income maximum several times, multiple times over the years, where you have a billionaire and they can just be a billionaire as an individual. And then my thought on that certainly also would be that you would have trillionaire companies where a company can have $1 trillion but not a penny over it. And the way you would accomplish that as a government is you would put a 100% tax on every dollar over $1 trillion in gross revenue, not net revenue, which would be different. On 100% tax on over $1 trillion on corporations is my suggestion, and Bernie Sanders has proposed 100% tax over $1 billion for people, stating that they can live on $999 million. Now, inherently, I didn't see anything more than the headline, so you're going to get into the weeds with the tax if this was a thing that really happened, in which most billionaires are not making $1 billion each year, and taxes are done annually in the longest. So you would have to, at a certain point, establish a new system to figure out how much somebody already has and put 100% tax, or an increasing scaled step-up tax on people's current existing income, or you're just grandfathering them in, which, yeah, maybe you just save the paperwork and you grandfather in every billionaires who has already $1 billion, and then you're taxing very little of their total overall wealth. Otherwise, you are going to have to start trying to claw back and capture people who are sitting on billions and billions of dollars already, and saying, hey, we know you have billions of dollars in housing assets and stocks and shares. You have $1 billion in just cash sitting around in banking accounts. But it's nice and interesting to certainly see Bernie Sanders bringing that concept out and people seeing it and it making a headline. Now, Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist, which turns off a lot of people who just hate the word socialism without even giving it any more thought than that in most cases. And certainly he is just not really in line with most of the fairly greedy Democratic senators and Congress people who they themselves are either billionaires at the moment or are aspiring to be billionaires in particular. So it's not like this would become a law or anything, but it does make certainly a sense. It is a continuation on the idea of the top 1% of 1% of people in the United States are not paying enough. Whether it's a fair share or not, taxes inherently are never going to be fair. So don't even try to make that argument that they just aren't paying enough to make a better country overall, and just maintain infrastructure and improve things. And yeah, with the other things going around the world that I don't really want to talk about, probably wouldn't hurt to have a little bit more cash in the coffers of the United States, just in case it's needed. I'll leave it at that. The other thing on this AI that they put here, AI definitely can't be creative like you, but it can multiply your creativity, which is funny that they're talking to advertisers and implying advertisers are particularly creative, when I would say advertisers, for the most part these days, have to hire somebody to be creative, and then they take that creativity and drown it in a bunch of metrics and statistics and meetings, and they give a bunch of notes to it. Inherently, I think the director of a Coca-Cola commercial is probably creative, or the writer of a Coca-Cola commercial is creative, but I don't think the board of advertisers and the people that all then look at those commercials and make changes are creative. And arguably, a lot of advertisements, I think, are perhaps too creative and not cautious enough, or not acceptable enough to the general populace. Inherently, your advertisement is trying to reach as broad of an appeal as possible, whereas creativity is very likely not to have a broad appeal. Things that are broadly appealable as far as arts tend to be not that creative. Like, look no further than like NCIS as a TV show or a series of TV shows. It's the same formula over and over again. No real twist, no real creativity at all in that. But yeah, you've got a whole bunch of buzzwords that they've turned into screenshots, which inherently, I guess, they got on stage, they made a speech, they had some slideshow screens, put it on their Twitter. Twitter is about getting your message across, and at least YouTube advertisers as a YouTube channel understands that. It's way better than YouTube Gaming, which has no message to really say and just tweets random things for engagement. I've never really seen YouTube advertisers try to get retweets or engagement, which let's just see where their reach and their retweets are. See if we can find something that's reached something big in relatively recent amount of time. These are all from just 4 or 5 hours ago. I mean, they're not doing terrible from 4 or 5 hours ago. Here you have one that was only seen by 418 people and already has 6 hearts. Of course, YouTube advertisers is a much more niche thing anyway, so it's not going to have a ton of followers. Like, here's a one from October 4th. That's about as far as I want to go. You can see considerably fewer views than YouTube Gaming, but relatively, I would say, way more engagement, even at 1 reply and 1 retweet and 6 hearts. Because you see YouTube Gaming posts that often have 100,000, maybe 50, 60,000 views, and you'll have maybe 12 hearts, maybe 20 retweets, maybe 4 or 5 comments. Seems like the ratio is probably higher here. Let's see, moving on. GameDeveloper.com says 343 Industry expands its Halo Infinite's Forge mode with campaign AI tools. This is, I think, in part going to let you add some story content to Forge mode too, which inherently this is probably going to be the closest thing to Halo 4 really having a narrative story worth mentioning. Excuse me, I gotta drink some water, and then I'm gonna change the direction on this emergency water lid. The handle's on the wrong side, which is a problem when you're trying to do everything with one hand instead of the other. The lid's on the wrong side, basically, which puts the handle on the wrong side. Yeah, let's see what it was saying. enables functions like spawning AI, controlling where AI navigates, and using node graph to control managing AIs. Now that really sounds like story mode stuff. Maybe I misunderstood and I heard it was going to have some more story mode stuff. Although, having AI in one place, particularly if it's an NPC and not somebody you're just shooting at, spawning them in a place and then having them navigate to a place is going to definitely be helpful if you're trying to have more of a living Halo world with characters. But inherently, Halo is so single-minded around you run and gun and jump in the game that having NPCs, having a narrative, having AI characters in general doesn't make the most sense in most cases. You're going to have to get very creative with it. Let's see where Minecraft also put out this poster talking about their over 300 million copies being sold with some other statistics. 15 million skeletons slayed, 8.8 pickaxe crafted, 915 kilometers traveled on piggyback, 700,000 cakes made, 6.7 million diamonds discovered, 0. What is that? Oh no, 0 smiles by creepers. Creepers never smile. And then 400,000 wolf's tamed. So just kind of random statistics, just to throw out big numbers. But since the biggest number here is 300 million, you probably shouldn't have any of these other numbers. Like inherently, if this number was smaller, if this was 300,000 and then they threw out a bigger number like 15 million skeletons being slayed, that could confuse a lot of people to think, oh, this is a bigger deal, this is a bigger number, and confuse a decent number of people of saying that over 15 million copies have been sold if it was really only 300,000. But there's really no reason to do it this way. You needed to not throw out numbers and have apples to apples comparison there. You needed to throw out something that was a different metric in general. Like, get rid of the numbers altogether, and then just have a nice pretty picture here. Yeah, this is the kind of picture made by a non-creative advertiser who lives in the world of statistics and numbers and loves numbers way too much, when the 300 million here is incredibly small. Like, you have these firecrackers here. Wouldn't it make a lot more sense to just have fireworks spelling 300 million and a little animated GIF of just 300 million, 300 million, 300 million? Or instead of fireworks, 300 million built in Minecraft, the word 300 million, or 300 at least, built in Minecraft, showing it off. Like, this is fine if you were making a PowerPoint presentation just trying to show off a bunch of numbers. It's not particularly even good in that case, but as a bit of advertisement, it's terrible. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Netflix is reportedly interested in adding GTA to its game catalog. The company wants major third-party games to complete its first-party titles. Is it specifically GTA 1 that they're looking for? I don't think so. I think they want to add basically any GTA game they could get on their catalog, which for the most part that would have to be something closer to GTA 3 than GTA 6 on their streaming services. Meanwhile, I would say there's just not a lot at the moment going on with Netflix. Overall, not basically nothing going on with their games, and I haven't been watching Netflix for months, so there's nothing new that I've seen there in several months. Pretty much given up on Netflix at this point. Bethesda's head of publishing and senior vice president, it's important to point this out, is retiring now that Starfield is launched. Quote, "My love of Bethesda and its people never wavered. I would never stop being part of this incredible community we have grown." That's a weird phrase to use, my love of Bethesda. You probably shouldn't say that as a senior VP and head of publishing, but whatever. It's not 100% professional. The thing to take from this, and this is a GameDeveloper.com article, is that with this, we get the beginnings of a chance to see where Microsoft should go and where Microsoft will go. Because where Microsoft should go is to say, we're not replacing the head of publishing at Bethesda. There's no reason to have a head of publishing or even a senior vice president. They shouldn't replace either one of them at Bethesda per se. And if they are replacing somebody, they're giving them a meaningless title that also will put them on, whoever gets that job and that title, on the chopping block to be made redundant, laid off, as soon as Microsoft finally chooses to start to merge in a lot of the management, in particular at Bethesda and other ZeniMax subsidiaries, into one, if not directly into Microsoft. There should be a Microsoft head of publishing, and that team should be fairly big, and they should be in charge of all the publishing for all Microsoft owned subsidiaries and companies. It's just that simple. Bethesda shouldn't have publishing. Really, probably shouldn't even have a much more than a single president just running and advocating for Bethesda as a subsidiary. But inherently, Bethesda kind of doesn't need to exist at all. Like, Bethesda really should just be shut down, and the programmers and developers at Bethesda should just become the Bethesda team at Microsoft, and they should directly report to a head of Microsoft and the head of publishing at Microsoft. It should be a much more flat structure with 3 or 4 rungs, whereas right now on the ladder there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rungs of management potentially there, from what I can guess. With Pete Hines retiring, which you're going to see a lot of people leaving now that Starfield is out, and inherently I've pretty much given up on Starfield. I think a lot of people are bored with Starfield and they're going back to Fallout 4 and they're going back to Skyrim. Starfield really failed to do anything new or creative. They didn't experiment at all with it, and if they did do any experimentation, it really was probably just on the hardware and the visual style of things, instead of saying, hey, let's do something weird and different. Let's get rid of maybe some of the stats that would normally be in a Fallout game or Elder Scrolls game and simplify the game, or let's have some weird abilities and stuff. Part of the thing about Fallout that makes Fallout fun is that you get these weird stats and RPG boosts, and where like drinking radioactive water can help you if you get a specific skill. I don't think there's anything like that in Starfield. Noticeably, he's standing behind this picture, and I have no idea what this flaming lava is all about. Yeah. I have no idea what Bethesda games. You have a Fallout here, you have a Fallout here, you have an Elder Scrolls here. This could be Starfield here, but it probably wasn't. But I have no idea what this would be. Now, if Microsoft does just let somebody else replace Pete Hines, then that shows Microsoft really only has an interest in just owning things without actually running things, and it's just bad management overall. Like, they need to tighten the belts a little bit on the management, and then they'll have extra money when they need to keep productive creative employees hired, or when they need to acquire another company. This story is only echoed with this next video game developer, GameDeveloper.com article. The Something Wicked Games has hired the former Starfield lead quest designer Will Shin. That being said, it is probably worth pointing out that most people don't like the lead quest in Starfield, so they probably got hopefully they didn't pay too much for this employee, or hopefully he can do a better job. Maybe he'll be less constrained in the new position. But yeah, the major complaint around Starfield has been the lead quest being way more boring than any of the side quests, which inherently that's always the case with Bethesda games, is that the main quest tends to be way less interesting. This is a decent picture of the guy, but perhaps button that top button on a collared shirt, like, or don't have that much skin showing in a thing. Although in fairness, if you just cropped it to the point where it was here, if you just cropped the picture here, that would have been fine. It's the extra 2 inches in the beginning of chest hair that's the problem, and you're not really missing much if you did just crop it to about there. My mouse scroll actually doesn't work, so I can't get it any more precise than that. It goes up 3 lines when I use the mouse wheel, but roll up and down. But yeah, professional looking picture pretty much, and centers the head a little bit better. Too casual of a picture, which inherently I complain about a lot of these game developers looking unprofessional, and not that I'm any prize pictorially, but in some parts this may be a case that you should just always only have public pictures of yourself where you look extremely professional, because this may be a case where GameDeveloper.com is just looking on the internet for people's photos and picking random photos that they don't intend to be professional photos. I doubt that's the case, and a lot of times you see photos of people when they're on stage and they're still not really dressed appropriately, professionally looking. But yeah, it does throw out that interesting idea that from the point of being like 18 years old or so, when you're probably should start having photos of yourself made to look professional onward, you should only post photos of yourself in professional manners for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, you don't want to post pictures of yourself doing drugs or getting drunk or things, because people can find that and use that against you. But yeah, and before 18 years old, I would say there shouldn't be any photos of any kids at all online, or not in any public manner. Google Photos shared between friends and family are acceptable in my book, but that's about it. Here we have Pete Hines in another example. He's standing behind a Bethesda thing and he's just wearing a t-shirt. Yeah, again, not particularly professional. Not even a really good picture in general. It's blurry and not well situated. His eyes are closed. This is a pretty awful picture. And this almost certainly is an example of, in this case, Video Games Chronicles finding a photo online instead of having a press release photo, which arguably that is another thing that a publishing and advertisement development, head of publishing in particular, should have down pat, that there should be a fairly standard form when you're sending out a press release to say, here's a photo of this person we'd like you to use, here's the information we'd like you to write up and make your own information on or report on. Here's contact information if you need it. But I do kind of feel like press packages have no standard format or formatting, and that is something that needs to be addressed. I assume that deep down in the Associated Press style guide somewhere, there is a way, the right way to do press packages and press releases according to the Associated Press, and that's pretty much what you should follow. But I don't think video game companies are following it particularly well at all. Of course, this might also be a case where somebody doesn't actually like this guy and they're putting out terrible photos. Here you have the Gamatsu article of the same story, and while this is a slightly better photo, it still heavily focuses and shows the lack of professional apparel he's wearing. He's just walking around. This, I believe, was probably at the E3 of several years ago, because I believe this is the couches that they would have. I feel like it was X-Play came back for one E3 and you'd have people sitting on the couches interviewing each other. It might have been Giant Bomb. It might have been that they were having a lot of people, a lot of different companies sitting on these couches, but I vaguely recall seeing these couches at an old E3 as a kind of elevated platform where people would sit and commentate and interview, which that would be more interesting, certainly. That was a decent thought, but it didn't get followed by much as far as E3's failures. It is kind of interesting here that you have message from Pete and it ends love you guys. Again, not very professional. And you can see this is about twice as long as Bethesda's own this is a very short response, basically, from Bethesda. But this guy is talking about my love for Bethesda never wavered. There is arguably perhaps a decent reason to not have people fall in love with their job that much or their co-workers that much, even on a platonic level. It is weird, to say the least. But yeah, certainly once you get into these upper management positions, people make their jobs their entire personality, their entire lives. And weirdly, I wouldn't say he looks that old for somebody retiring. Like, yes, he has gray hair, but I would say he's in his 50s or 60s. He's hardly hitting 70, 72, 75 from the looks of it. Although he might be that old. You never really know. Certainly in video games, people retire strategically a lot more than just people retiring because of a certain age. And that's something that probably should change, is that the infrastructures of game companies should be a little bit more robust so that anybody could retire at the appropriate age, 70, 75, whatever. Ideally 65, I guess. I don't know why I'm saying 75. Retirement age is closer to 65, isn't it? But yeah, there should be enough people where you don't have to think about strategically retiring after a game has been released, and a lot of that has to do with game companies not putting your credits on games if you leave the company before then, and that needs to be made illegal almost certainly. Let's see, Activision Blizzard seemingly has been acquired. FTC, I heard, was going to still try to appeal in December. We'll see what happens there, but the acquisition at the moment has gone through. there is what I would say still possibly a misunderstanding, either on my part or everyone else's part, I'm not sure, as to whether or not Bobby Kotick is going to leave in January of 2023 or not. I think the thing here is I've only seen a story or a headline that said that Phil Spencer said that Bobby Kotick would be working to help facilitate the transition through January of 2023. I think people are taking that to mean that he's going to leave after January of 2023, when through January of 2023 literally only means that it will be at least up to January of 2023. So I still am sticking to my thought that Bobby Kotick probably is going to stay around longer than people think, and that there's some misunderstanding there. But if he does leave, then the question really just comes down, in my mind, as to what has Microsoft actually purchased in Activision Blizzard. On one level, they've given worldwide licensing streaming rights to Ubisoft for, I assume, existing games, and they've made separate agreements with Call of Duty with a bunch of companies as far as certain platforms and streaming services. But anything new from Activision Blizzard potentially isn't in that worldwide streaming rights situation at all. So if you had bought Activision Blizzard for the existing programming team, you could almost certainly have them make something like Call of Duty, not called Call of Duty, and have them make games that are just brand new, and those very possibly aren't in part of Ubisoft's controls. But if that's the idea, then you have to believe in an almost fantasy that the current staff at Activision Blizzard is the good programmers and the good game developers, when it can't possibly be the case, when Activision Blizzard and King and all of them have been bleeding talent for years and years and years. Unless you can get those talented people to come back and work for Microsoft again, which I doubt will be done. So you really wouldn't want to buy Activision Blizzard for the current staff, in my opinion. And you've lost a lot of the value in buying it for the current intellectual properties and the games that have already been developed. You do own the names to those games to make sequels, I guess. And if they actually get rid of Bobby Kotick, then you're losing the main management. I would assume you're going to lose a lot of the main management there, unless there's just some secret diamonds in the rough hidden below Bobby Kotick. Because the one thing that Bobby Kotick, even though everybody universally agrees he's a jerk, the one thing he had is that he rubbed elbows with rich people and politicians. And so unless Bobby Kotick can just give his Rolodex, his address book of contacts, to all the rich and influential people and politicians, which is to jokingly, I guess, imply politicians aren't people, which, let's go with that for the moment. Unless Bobby Kotick just hands his address book, his Rolodex, to Phil Spencer, and then Phil Spencer succeeds in something that I don't think he's really capable of succeeding, which is to convert those existing friends of Bobby Kotick into being friends of Phil Spencer, I really question if they didn't just severely overpay for Activision Blizzard to actually get very little, other than to establish a precedent that Microsoft can acquire giant companies and the FTC can't do anything to stop them, or to just accomplish something that I just can't see. It'll be very interesting to see if this merger, one, stays together, which it almost certainly will, and two, leads to anything being done well at all. The odds are extremely low. Microsoft has acquired so many other companies, and so far none of those other companies have particularly prospered or come out with a great number of good games. As it is, like Double Fine made Psychonauts 2, and 343, I guess, made something called Halo 4, but I can't really think of anything amazing otherwise. Yes, ZeniMax and Bethesda made Starfield and finished making Starfield, but they almost certainly would have done that anyways. This is definitely a merger that people should study and research for years, and almost certainly there will be a book that comes out at some point just looking at this merger from a retrospective and seeing if it actually was a good deal, because the odds of it being a bad deal seem much higher than it being a good deal. But who knows, maybe Phil Spencer, now that he's in charge of Xbox, really is just going to do something really wild and different, and we'll just see. Like, we have all kinds of things that were leaked accidentally as far as what they were planning in the past to do with the Xbox, as far as a new revision of an Xbox that is diskless and online only, and maybe that will never come to pass, and maybe in that we will see that Phil Spencer has a completely different plan, and the more things we see in those leaks that don't happen shows how much they potentially are going to pivot, have pivoted, how much has changed with the Major Nelson no longer really being in charge. Which, in fairness, at the end there, Major Nelson didn't really feel like he was doing his job particularly well. Well, it's now going to be a case, as far as whether time tells, whether Phil Spencer does it any better. I need to hurry up, though, since we're going to go 4 hours long. Sony has released a spoilery Spider-Man 2 launch trailer ahead of reviews. I guess I'd recommend don't watching this, but it is a Video Games Chronicle if you want to check it out, or at least the article here is. The link to the trailer seems not to be. Yeah, GameDeveloper.com here has this this article, and GameDeveloper.com in particular is very much pushing around getting rid of Bobby Kotick. This has been, I think, jokingly cropped of Bobby Kotick. I don't think they released a picture with his head being cropped that way. But even they have to admit the way it's phrased is that he just won't lose his job before the end of 2023. In an email sent to staff, Phil Spencer and Kotick will remain with the Call of Duty publisher through the end of 2023. Which, yeah, it certainly highlights how people often live in this reality distortion field, and they just hear what they want to hear a lot of times, or what they're even being told they want to hear by, say, mainstream video game journalists, instead of really reading the articles, which I'm no better. I just read the headlines most of the time too, but I have yet to see any actual evidence, and I'm trying to see it and trying to be as accurate as possible, that says Bobby Kotick is leaving at any point in the near future. And honestly, it seems like at least I understand the merger a lot better if Bobby Kotick doesn't get fired, because then it's a pretty blatant effort by Phil Spencer and Microsoft to just be a corporate protector of Activision Blizzard and prevent a hostile takeover from Activision Blizzard or an ousting somehow due to public opinion of Bobby Kotick. which, if Bobby Kotick really is good at running elbows and making friends, which I think he actually is, I think that's his one main skill, he very possibly has just made friends in Microsoft, and that would be the reason, certainly, why they would be protecting him. Let's see. So, don't really need to look at these charts. Let's just jump over to this chart. So my chart, as far as the total active game players per data entry, is getting filled in better and better here. We are hitting a point where eventually this is going to start to squish, but we may have also hit a point where maybe this is just going to go off the edge. Like, I'm not 100% sure that 916 was the right size. The first data day. Let's see, we have scroll bars showing, and either I could show it this way and lose a bunch of space, or I can leave it here. I think it probably is better just to leave here. Although, if I was to, say, take this part, I can do that and get rid of that, and that saves a little bit of space. Although, weirdly, that just added a bottom part here. So I don't know if that really helped anything. But I didn't like the title bar being up there anyways. So as far as looking at the chart instead of just fiddling with the chart, we have Naraka Blade Point not making it to the top 10 this time. And I wonder if maybe something weird happened there, or if Naraka Blade Point just has dropped severely, because Naraka Blade Point has been kind of on the up. If you were to normalize this line, it's been going up and up, so it's weird that all of a sudden it would be way down. Rust is back on charts, and Team Fortress 2 is back up a little bit. Cyberpunk 2077 is leveling off, and Call of Duty is way up again. Then Baldur's Gate is going back up, although overall Baldur's Gate is just going to go lower and lower. It kind of doesn't matter. Inherently, I need probably a total here. I would have to mess with the chart, and I'm not going to do that anytime soon, to figure out what the total number of players per day is, or per the top 10. I'm only really getting the top 10. Let's go back here and check Naraka Blade Point and see where it fell, because I really am grabbing only the top 10 on the macro or so. So where on this chart, this is where we get the information to make the other chart comes from, is Naraka Blade Point. Yeah, wow. Naraka Blade Point here jumped down to the 42nd spot with a 24-hour peak of 261,000. Wait a minute. So when we click this, then that should have come here. Alright. I think I know what happened here. The data I got, I think, is a little bit inaccurate this time because I was signed out on Steam, and because I was signed out on Steam, I was signed out of this page, and so when this page opened, it wasn't sorted in the appropriate way. I need to double check that and make sure that doesn't happen again, because inherently Naraka Blade Point should have been in as a data point added to the chart, and it wasn't. Okay. I'll have to remind myself to work on that too. Let's see, as far as featured and recommended, we have a Vegas Infinite, which, if it doesn't have real world gambling, I'm pretty sure it has microtransactions in it. We can check that in a second. And then we have several suggested games being promoted. Steam Next Fest pretty much being ignored at this point. And then Viewfinder catches my eye, certainly. That's the game I'd like to buy, but I'm just way over budget as far as any extra purchases, probably for the rest of the year. What I'd really like to do, and I don't know how you convince people to do this, would be to move Thanksgiving to about February. Just say, hey, we're not going to have a national holiday for Thanksgiving. You can celebrate it if you want to, but it's too many events. So this game, it's early access. Seems like you can play in VR, and it does have in-app purchases. So as far as, do you want the closest thing to a Vegas experience without actually going to Vegas? This doesn't look terrible, and the VR aspect there maybe adds a little bit to that, although I'm not sure it adds that much. And this is by Poker Stars. Does it have a third-party account? It's a third-party EULA. Access to in-app purchases may be restricted by location. Voice over IP is monitored by Toxic Mod. Vegas Infinite is not a gambling product and does not present an opportunity to win real world money. 18 plus only. Please play responsibly. So they're saying it's not a gambling product because you can only put money in and you can't take it out. But you can definitely put it in. I'm going to put this on the follow list, not that I'd ever actually play it. But inherently I am always looking for a decent poker game. But I want one where you can really just pay $60 for the game and just play forever and not run out of cash and then have to worry about that. Although as a free-to-play game, couldn't you just make a new account to get some starter cash over and over again if you needed to? Probably, but it would be a hassle on Steam to do that. Anyways, that brings us to the Video Games Chronicle news, which this macro didn't want to run particularly well either. Most of this news, pretty old news still. There really isn't a lot that happened over the weekend. So Bethesda updated Redfall with a 60 frames per second mode, gameplay changes and more. I haven't heard anybody really giving it a decent chance. I think I heard one person say that a lot of the problems with Redfall have been improved, but it's still really just no reason that you would go back and try Redfall. See, Call of Duty Warzone Mobile has been delayed to the spring of 2024. Last of Us Remastered listed on Naughty Dog's devs LinkedIn. Mario Bros. Wonder is leaked online. Interesting. Mortal Kombat 1 has a character look for Omni-Man, or first look for Omni-Man, which, yeah, he fits into the Mortal Kombat universe pretty decently as a DLC character, but he still stands out as not being a complete fit, and inherently I'm not sure he really adds that much to Mortal Kombat, nor do I think that many people really like Omni-Man. He's a character literally designed to be unlikable by the time you're at the end of the first season of Invincible, which season 2 of Invincible has a trailer out for the Netflix animated series also. But yeah, he's eventually revealed to be the bad guy, so he's not really a lovable bad guy at all. In fact, he's pretty quickly revealed to be the bad guy, even in the Invincible cartoon. Let's see, Just Stop Oil protesters interrupted UK's biggest games event, EGX, which, okay, I guess that might even be a sign that EGX has gained the attention and gotten to be successful enough that protesters will get on it, and I imagine we'll start to see more and more of that in general. Not 100% sure what the message of Just Stop Oil really is, other than just stopping oil, which really isn't a terrible thought. I don't know how you do it, though. Like, the easiest thing in the world would be have World War III happen, have all the Middle Eastern countries where you get most of the oil stop producing oil, and then force the entire world outside of the Middle East to develop faster, better electric vehicles, and also oil byproducts such as plastics being replaced. There was one thing that DF Retro was talking about, how the new PlayStation 5 slimmed down version, how he wanted a wooden version of that instead of metal, without him really mentioning how terrible wood is for thermals, but I'm not sure how much thermals you really need on the outside of a console. But we really are at the point where building something or growing something in bamboo should be investigated and done better, or there are kind of a foam packing things you can make with a special type of mycelium mushroom instead of having packing peanuts being made out of petroleum-based products too. Boxes in general, shipping crates, cardboard boxes. Cardboard is just paper and glue, mostly glue, I would say, more than even paper. But yeah, being able to build shipping crates out of something that, like bamboo, would be interesting if you could do it. It'd be interesting if you could get some kind of bamboo to grow into a specific size and shape. Cardboard's not even really as bad as plastic is, though, because cardboard mostly burns and just turns into carbon. It's not as bad as plastic is, which doesn't go anywhere. But yeah, oil is just being used way too much, so I can sympathize with Just Stop Oil's, I assume, their thought. I don't know if their approach is particularly interesting that many people or accomplishing anything. It's, I believe, Just Stop Oil that are the people that in the UK are constantly like gluing themselves down to roads and things like that, and just being an overall nuisance, losing people instead of convincing people to join their sides. But then a lot of these movements, they come off as nuisances to your average man. Like Martin Luther King's probably a great example of that. The Black Marches led by Martin Luther King, or Rosa Parks in particular, and the seats. All of that was described as nuisances and bad things originally, and eventually, through a lot of persistence, through a lot of struggle, the history sides with the protesters way more than the anti-protesters. So a lot of times you just have to be annoying in the short run to get people to pay attention in the long run. Moving on back to games, Sam Lake has said that Alan Wake 2's free DLC will be, quote, significant. Okay, I'm going to say take that headline to mean whatever that means. Like, it seems like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point to try and build up more hype for Alan Wake 2, when inherently I suspect Alan Wake 2 can't be as interesting as people are hyping it up to be. PlayStation Network data reportedly hints at trophies for PlayStation PC games, Sony adding the ability to link PlayStation Network accounts to Spider-Man PC last year. Which, okay. That's really only going to affect people that already have a bunch of trophies in the PlayStation Network. I wish Microsoft had the same things. I could see arguably wanting to connect my Microsoft account to Halo games and Steam games and Windows Store games, and get those achievements interconnectable between Steam achievements, which mean nothing, and trophies on the PlayStation Network, and achievements on the Xbox Network, which mean a little bit more. They don't mean much. Although inherently, if you start getting that connected, you also are drawing the line in the sand to say you will never ever get anything of any value from having a bunch of trophies or gamer score or achievements, which I would much prefer to get some kind of reward on Steam for playing a bunch of video games, whether it's just store credit or something of actual value to say, hey, you're a special person, you've played a lot of video games, we appreciate your business, so here's some Steam credit, Steam store credit. And Steam hasn't done that either, and they've gone to their point shop, whereas previously at least you could get trading cards and sell them on the Steam market for a few pennies. And yeah, no real easy way to complain about this if it happens. Let's see. Like a Dragon Gaiden won't feature an English dub at launch. The game will be playable in Japanese with English subtitles, which I guess means the other Like a Dragon games have had English dubs. Otherwise, you're not really reporting on much. But yeah, I imagine the fans of Like a Dragon series won't really have a big problem with that, and would be fine with that anyways. I don't think you're going to get a big backlash because of that. Although, inherently, I don't know if it really saves you much time or money to not just have an English dub made, because it's basically a completely different team doing the English dub voice acting anyways. The only thing it maybe does is take up a little bit of time of the general producer that he then has to check and look at the English dub if they're actually paying attention to the English dub at all, which they tend not to actually pay any attention to it. We already talked about there being a new Sonic coming next week, allegedly. I talked about this trailer. Just Cause maker Avalanche is opening a new studio in Canada. The move follows the acquisition of the Montreal-based studio Monster Closet, which, okay. Well, It'll be 4 to 8 years before we see any game come out of that studio, I'm sure. I don't care about their podcast. We already talked about Pete Hines leaving. We already talked about Netflix and Pokemon and the analog. Which I assume this isn't really what the analog is going to look like, a big triangular device. That would be weird, certainly. That's going to bring us to the Gematsu articles. Let's see, a game called Pedal Crush 2 has been announced. I feel like we have already talked about that. Again, there may not be that much new news, even from Gematsu's side. Mobile Suit Gundam UC Engage is coming to the West on October 17th for smartphones. This is definitely a callback to the long-running Gundam series, so it is a very old-school animation style, which there probably is room for 1 or 2 modern animes in this style, but I bet you can't find very many people in Japan able to draw in this style. If anything, we're getting an almost shift to the point where Western animators have a better chance of drawing in this style than Japanese or Eastern animators do, because Western animators potentially are being inspired by this style a little bit more than Eastern animators, and Eastern animators back in the 60s and 70s that drew the style were being inspired by Western animators and Disney, so it really is just a snake eating its tail in a very slow process, coming in waves. Let's see, Crime Machina demo is now available for the PS4 and 5 and the Switch in the West, so there's demos available. Let's see, we already talked about Kevin Afghani voice acting. This is a great example of where the internet kind of has fallen apart, is that you would think you'd want an audio file here, and there really isn't a great system that's used these days to play audio files. Like if I was going to show an audio file on a web page, almost certainly I would make it a YouTube clip video with just no video element to it and embed a YouTube video instead of having like a direct MP3 that people could download, or some other streaming service like Spotify or something like that embedded, which theoretically you could have those elements, but people wouldn't really recognize it. The YouTube embed would make a lot more sense, and even when you're sharing video and audio on things like Twitter, those embeds really not designed to play audio exclusively. It's also a little surprising YouTube doesn't have a way to take an audio file and then run a visualizer on it to make some video when there isn't any. Mortal Kombat 1 Omni-Man first look trailer, we have that too. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth at the New York Comic Con 2023. Vincent Valentine voice actor has been announced as Matt Mercer. Director Naoki Hamaguchi has a Q&A. Matt Mercer. Matt Mercer sounds like a name I would recognize. But I couldn't place him anywhere. Certainly it would be helpful here if you could click on Matt Mercer and get a link more about him. And then the rest of this whole quote here is really just the interview. So it almost seems like Matt Mercer was the interviewer interviewing the director, while also being an employee of the director, which comes off weird, certainly. Moving on, Naruto X Boruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections has an anime opening song trailer available if you want to check that out. So here's older adult Naruto and his child Boruto. Which you can see in this thumbnail, which is all I'm going to really look at. Here you have younger Naruto and younger characters. Remember, I tried to watch the original Naruto anime, and it's like 100 episodes, and I'd say probably about 70 of those episodes at the end are unnecessary and filler arc. There's a specific point where they lose a character. Sasuke here leaves the village, and after that point wraps up, once they start doing episodes not associated with that, that's pretty much the end of the manga as I understand it, and the rest of it is just straight up filler stories, at the end of which Naruto leaves to train some more, and perhaps that is in part of the better idea of Boruto, is that they were trying to retell the same story but do it better on the second time. Although I've heard most people don't like Boruto as a character either, and they actually like some of the other new characters in the Boruto series. But yeah, Bandai is just going to constantly push this. Bandai Namco is going to constantly push Naruto as long as it sells and make video games based on it. And it's questionable whether you need to play any of them. Let's see. Spider-Man 2's launch trailer. If you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Several Japanese game releases. Let's see. Drift CE, Endless Dungeon, Hot Wheels Unleashed 2, Spider-Man 2, Passepartout 2, Sonic Superstars, and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. The digital-only releases lately have become particularly small under these lists for Japanese releases, which makes me suspect that more things are getting physical releases now, perhaps because the PlayStation 5 is more available in part in Japan, or perhaps just due to the time of the year. But for the past 3 or 4 months, it's been very, very long list of digital only releases and very short lists of 3 or 4 games coming out per week in Japan. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R DLC character Yuya Fungami launches October 20th. I assume that's who this character is, and his stand fighting character. Persona 5 Tacticia has a third trailer, which weirdly does imply that this game is not out yet. I would have thought it already was out. I'm having a real hard time trying to figure out what this is. It feels like this lady is being strapped to the table or something. Like these are her hands. There's her legs. So she's on her knees. So it's like she has a bag or something around her. It's kind of an odd angle picture. Still not really interested in that game though. Crim announces a roguelike action game called Star Knot for PC. Which this literally is going to be the first game today with any new announcement, which maybe highlights that we are at the end of the point as far as having announcements happen until the new year, as far as new games go. RoboQuest launches November 7th, although it might also be a case where tomorrow or Wednesday when I stream again, there will just be a bunch of new news. I also found a plugin, but I haven't installed it and played around with it, that will let me click on links and open them to the left instead of the right. That will be very helpful to work with my other plugin. It's kind of a shame that it doesn't do a little bit more, so I could replace a different plugin. It sucks to have yet another plugin running on Firefox. I already have about 20 of them running, wasting RAM. But yeah, ideally, if it lets me open something on the left, open new tabs on the left, then when I click on something, it will be on the left. Then I can hit my middle mouse button to close a tab, and then the next tab would be the tab I just had started from, so it'll close that. I'll be able to hit the middle mouse button the second time to close that one, which means less going up here and tabbing back and forth the way I am now, which over the course of 3 or 4 hours of streaming, yeah, that's a lot of extra work. To really small numbers of work, but extra work certainly to have to go back and forth. Bethesda Softworks, Pete Hines to retire, we already talked about. Gangs of Sherwood has a gameplay overview trailer available if you want to check that out. Let's see if this one's on the follow list. Yes, it is. Although weirdly, maybe I'm looking for a solution that already exists, because I just clicked the middle mouse button and it took me to the tab on the left. Anyways. Yeah, I might be moving back and forth on the tabs for no reason. Let's see. We have this last story. Astral Synth launches November 14th for the PS4 and 5, Switch, and PC. I click on this, it opens a new tab. We see that the game is already on the follow list, so I don't need to make a new YouTube short on it. The middle mouse button here, and it goes back to this. Now, when I middle mouse button this, it goes to the right. So there is this odd programming happening here that you would not inherently realize. In that it is testing to see if the tab to the right is part of a chain, if it's a child, if it's been spawned from the tab to the left. And then when I hit the middle mouse button, it goes to the tab to the left. If the current tab is a child, it's been opened from the tab on the left, but it goes to the right if it isn't. So everything is working perfectly, and I've just not been realizing it, and I've been working harder, not smarter, for no reason. Which I bet everybody does that quite a bit actually in their life, is that there are these little intuitive programs and elements to things that people just take for granted or don't realize exist here. Alright, well, that brings us to GameDeveloper.com articles. Apparently Peter Molyneux wants Project Moat to represent his life's work. Molyneux hopes his in-progress title Project Moat will be an encapsulation of his 41-year tenure in the game industry. Well, I mean, good luck on that. I really wouldn't trust Peter Molyneux or anything he says, but nobody really wants to see any of his games fail. But almost certainly he'll be known for Fable, for whatever little elements he added that were good to Fable. Or more likely he'll be known for self-aggrandizing and overselling games and doing exactly what he's doing now, which is hyping up games to far too high of a level. I talked about Minecraft crossing 300 million sales. Industrial veterans form a Jam and Tea Studios to build multiplayer RPG using generative AI. Inherently, if you're starting a company, by saying we're going to use artificial intelligence. I don't think you're going to get a lot of people who want to support your game that way. Let's see, it has 3.15 million in seed funding, and I wouldn't be surprised if every single one of those dollars goes into paying the industrial veterans' salaries, with very little being produced otherwise. As far as seed funding goes, I'm not sure if there's much limits or legal limits at all to stop you from renting out an incredibly cheap office and giving the appearance that you're actually working on something, and then just paying people salaries to sit around and do nothing. I don't even know if you really have to rent out an office. You could potentially have everybody work from home and sit around and do nothing and pay their salaries. Like, the idea of a fiscal duty or anything like that is not that legally protected. You could certainly say, I'm paying my employees to work and I am satisfied with their work, and seed funding investors really have probably no protection at all. Meanwhile, from the other side, as a gamer, I don't want to support a company that's immediately saying we're going to use generative AI as our main sales point as a company, nor am I particularly interested in a multiplayer RPG game, World of Warcraft style game, I assume. They're not calling it an MMO RPG, but that's the only thing it possibly could be and successful. A multiplayer RPG that has only like 4 to 10 people playing doesn't make a lot of sense. Although, in all fairness, Baldur's Gate 3, if it had multiplayer in it as a feature, wouldn't be terrible. I don't think it does. However, and once you have even a second player in an RPG, you're not really role-playing the experience you want to experience. You're role-playing a group experience, which can have problems, certainly. Ask anybody who's ever had a bad group of teammates in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. One bad person doing something silly or dumb can really ruin the experience, which is the problem with multiplayer in general. Is this one apple can certainly spoil the whole bunch in any multiplayer experience. Moving on, we already talked about the Epic Launch First Run initiative, now on Epic. Yep. It's like, it's two different programs. So there's a First Run initiative here, and then there is also a Now on Epic. The Now on Epic is the back catalog incentive program, where the First Run incentive is the new games incentive program. And the Now on Epic is an 88% cut. Or something like that. I'm not even going to bother to read it because it doesn't matter to me. I'm not publishing a game. But yeah, it's different offerings if your game is brand new versus if your game is old. But clearly they're trying to get more games in both programs on the Epic Games Store. And we'll have to wait and see if it actually succeeds. I suspect it won't. We already talked about Pete Hines. We already talked about Yoshitaka Tamaki. We already talked about Netflix. And then the Epic Games Store, in the same news cycle, cut almost half of Bandcamp's pre-song trader sale. Ahead of being sold to Song Trader, Bandcamp stamp have reportedly been reduced to nearly half its current size by the parent company of Epic Games. In a lot of cases, when you sell a company, they often ask the company to lay off a bunch of people, and that's something we may see with Activision Blizzard too, is that you might see this major culling in which half of the Activision Blizzard employees get laid off by Bobby Kotick before the merger goes through, but I guess the merger's gone through, so I guess that didn't happen. It would be kind of weird if it happened now, but I wouldn't be surprised. You probably won't see it after January 1st, so if there aren't any major layoffs in Activision Blizzard before January 1st, you wouldn't expect any. But I could see a lot of companies saying, hey, we want to own the company Bandcamp, but we don't want all these employees, so can you get rid of half of them for us? But then you also see the exact opposite, where a company gets acquired and then all of a sudden half of the people get laid off fairly quickly. So it happens both ways. It's pretty much just very easy to lay off people in general, so it's not like there's a lot of paperwork or nonsense that has to go through the process, not as much as there probably should be. If you had to justify laying off people to some kind of National Labor Review Board panel, then perhaps there'd be a little bit fewer layoffs, but nope, that's not how late stage capitalism works in the United States, at least. Alright, so we got some fall list cleanup here. Just go through some games. We have Hellsweeper VR, which looks like a dungeon crawler. Why am I even looking at it? It's a VR game. It looks good. I'll leave it on the fall list. Hello Puppets VR. Stu requires VR. While I might want to play a game like this, I can't do it in VR, so it's easy enough to get rid of. I don't want a horror game in particular in VR. Hello Engineer, Strap Metal Constructor. Looks good enough to be put on the wish list. Has over 30 reviews. They're mostly positive, although not hugely popular or particularly positive. Hellish Court. Everything's starting with H, so it's all hell something. Very positive, but early access, so we'll keep it on the fall list because of that reason. Engineers. Think we can get rid of that. That probably was only on the fall list because I made a short on it. Hell Furnace. English not supported. Korean only. Interesting. Well, we'll take that off the fall list then. Then we have Hellfire. The way I use the fall list has changed somewhat now that I'm just putting everything on the fall list if I make a short on it, and that is just going to increasingly make a situation where I'm going to be a little confused as to why something is on the fall list when it almost certainly isn't something I would care about. See, and this one looks like it's mixed in its early access. I imagine it's been abandoned, and that's the problem. Let's see. Not enough content in it is what they're saying. Well, despite a massive amount of very positive reviews, it really doesn't look like a game for me, and the early access here doesn't really inspire confidence since it's been in early access at least since February. So I'm going to take that off. Then Hellboy here is not out yet, so we'll leave that. And then that brings us to all the new games on Steam, and this didn't run correctly, and I don't know why specifically this didn't run correctly, but it it gave me trouble, and I had to do it manually. Which there's definitely some things that could be missed here. You've got what looks like somewhat old 4:3 ratio point and click games with Arthur in it. Which, yeah, that's weird that this wouldn't already be out, but it's also weird that it's coming out now. I don't think Arthur is super popular at the moment, but we have, I think, just 3 games here in Arthur's Reading Race, Arthur's Teacher Trouble, and Arthur's Computer Adventure. They were talking about on Reddit, which I'm still looking at Reddit, despite there being good reasons not to go there. There's not been anything to replace it, and all the controversies around Reddit pretty much have been forgotten. But the original version of Arthur the Aardvark, which he's an aardvark, had him have a long aardvark nose, and the very first book in the series, they were saying on Reddit, was all about how Arthur loved his nose and didn't need to change it, and then eventually they redrew Arthur to look like the way he was animated in the PBS version, and so his nose has been turned into a much smaller nose, which the way they were representing it on Reddit was deceptive to imply that the second book in the series originally changed the appearance of his nose, when it really didn't. But it does hit to a point that when PBS started animating it, they did hit on something that would have made a lot of sense, which is to not draw an aardvark with a long nose, because then you're going to have to draw that long nose over and over again, and it's just going to constantly get in the way. And character design really hits on that. You can see in this PBS animation style, there's not a lot of effort being put into the animating of characters. They're not really concerned with keeping characters consistently proportional or visually good looking in general. But yeah, I don't think there's really anything super wrong with Arthur. It's just kind of an older game, or an older cartoon. We have a game called Prototype here, which I would lean on just assuming is a prototype. Yeah, I don't see anything here that really catches my attention, so that's going to be a no. And then looks like we've got an asset flip horror game with some dark screenshot syndrome. We can say no to that. Cafe Master Story. I think we can probably say no to that. Yeah, there's too many of these coming out. They're basically flooding Steam. Although, not a lot of competition for these little mobile games anyway, so it's kind of hard to complain about them existing. Here we have something called Slow Living with Princess, which sounds like a pretty terrible name for a game, and looks like a Stardew Valley clone. Some implied nudity here that I bet you don't actually get to see anything. There is something that this does that most of the Stardew Valley games don't do, which is it seems like you start with a female princess friend, romance interest, and that probably eliminates the idea of having other romance interests, whereas most of these games you have multiple romance interests, and even here it implies there might be multiple romance interests. So who knows? English, Chinese, Japanese, and the language. You certainly could tell a fantasy story. I like how he's just slashing through all these fruits and vegetables to collect it. That seems like that's less work overall. Yeah, it looks like you get a harem of fighters that fight with you in the RPG elements. But I don't think it's quite there. You definitely could take a story, though, where you're betrothed to a princess, but you're allowed to take on mistresses, too. That definitely would put a spin on it, but that's fairly in line with most feudal systems, is that you officially may take on a mistress also. I'm gonna say no to that game, and I'm gonna say no to Flock Party, which is just a flying around game. Probably gonna say no to Brown Bob also. And Gunworld VR. Here we have a precision platformer called Mr. Simmel, which looks like nothing. Here we have an RPG maker game called Under One Roof. 10 minutes short story for 59 cents is going to be a no. Hidden Breaking Bed top-down 3D is obviously trying to create name confusion with Breaking Bad. So that's going to be a no. Defense Cards looks terrible. Hidden World War II top-down 3D. Obviously this is somebody getting very uncreative with their naming. Maybe they're rushing out to put out as many hidden object asset flips as possible before the Unity asset store no longer becomes viable. Hidden Space top-down 3D. Yep. 3 games from the same publisher, same developer, I think. Squad Blast. Might be something to this, so I'll give it a chance. Finish War is not animated well enough for a yes. Alta's Odyssey. I'll give this. I want to give it a yes, but I'm really gonna have to say no. You know what? I'll put it on the fall list. I don't know why I'm even doing that though. Just make a decision. Just say no. Yeah. Luna's Adventure, The Overlord. Not quite polished. I don't hate the idea though of having a younger, plainer looking character protagonist, at least to start off with. And of course, sometimes you start off with in a role-playing game with a fairly plain looking character, and then the first time you get any armor at all, you're completely covered in the armor, and then you look completely different. So yeah, if you're gonna make something kind of like a Harry Potter game, the struggle to make Harry Potter seem plain throughout the entire game would be difficult. They kind of ran into that same problem with the Harry Potter movies. As the first movie, Harry Potter looks like a very plain average kid, and by the end of the movie, all of the actors have so much makeup and have changed their appearance so much by growing up and just by making themselves as pretty as possible that they all look like the celebrities and the actors that they are. I'm going to say no to Luna's Adventure. Our first adult game here we have is a game called Succubus Sex Story. 3D CGI characters. And yeah, Succubus on the throne, several girls, a couple guys maybe. Visual novel overall. It is $6.19. It claims to have full English audio. It's being bundled with 3 other games for $12. The thing that you run into, though, is when you introduce the succubus into the narrative, are you doing anything with the gameplay, or are you just introducing a character for no reason? And since it is just a generic visual novel, it usually comes off and feels like you're just introducing a character for no reason. This game looks terrible, so I'm gonna say no to that. Then next we have College Sex Episode 2 as an adult game, which is slightly better 3D CGI depictions. When you don't have succubuses in it, you can tend to focus more on more realism. Now, notably, both of these games have had screenshots particularly focusing on licking butt, for lack of a better term. I could say tossing salad or analingus either, but I haven't seen a lot of screenshots focused on that either. Although I have heard jokingly that mostly, I would imagine, it's California kids have started trends that their celebrity parents are talking about doing that. Of course, that's the way all these trends and things you see in the news is that somebody says all the kids are doing this these days, or that's the big fad, and really it's something happening in a Los Angeles school, one Los Angeles school possibly, or maybe a New York school possibly, or at most it's happening on the East Coast and West Coast in LA, California, and New York City, but it gets reported like it's happening all over the country, and then schools, teachers, school boards overreact and think it's happening where they are happening, where plenty of places, most places, it isn't happening. Captain Goose looks like it might be something interesting, whatever the fad happens to be. That's how most of those fads go. I commissioned some cats. We're still seeing this creator fill Steam a little bit slower with these hidden object weird pictures that are far too detailed really for a hidden object game. It'd be very challenging to try and find all of the cats in a picture like this, because there could be a lot of visual distractions. That's a duck there. Just very easy to miss a bunch. There's a duck there. But yeah, it would be very difficult. We have something called Rolls and Die, which looks like it might just be a tabletop game, but it doesn't quite have enough visual polish for me to say yes to it. Now, is this next game an adult game? Game includes nudity of the character's body as well as exposed clothing, breast shakes, hip shakes, and other body physical effects. Now, noticeably, this game is not in the adult section, however. It's called Doomsday School, and it looks like it's an asset flip survival game, and they've just asset flipped a topless lady with giant butt and a bikini thong running around. With a little bit more subtlety, the idea of having a character in a Doomsday event and then possibly taking damage and possibly having some of their clothes tear can work in my mind, but you gotta actually put some effort into it and not just make an asset flip survival game, which is all that really was. And it is just going to always be the struggle. Can you get a immature ESRB rating, or get a game that has clothing damage and some minor nudity? Can that be brought to the level of being on a disc, being sold in stores, or is it constantly, even 100 years from now, always going to be thought that mature in video games really only means PG-13 equivalent in as far as movies go, or R equivalent as far as movies go. This R is for Rachel game looks like it's mostly just a text-based story, but visual novel, barely even a visual element, although nice looking backgrounds, I guess, hand drawn, although these could just be actual photos that have just been filtered to look like that too. You know what, I'm going to put this on the follow list, but I'm not going to bother to make a short on it. I'll give it more of a chance than it probably deserves. Yeah. It doesn't really seem that crazy, too, that somebody might just want to be topless, a lady might want to be topless in a disaster scenario. Not most disaster scenarios, but I could see you're living in a world where bras are, well, not easily to get a hold on, or like where you just don't want the pain and struggle of wearing one, where there's just nobody else around. Certainly the case too. A lot of Japanese rice farmer ladies would farm topless just because it's so hot. Yeah, the heat would be the issue, certainly there. Anyways, I'm kind of rambling. Reliefs the time of the lemurs. I'm gonna put this on the follow list even though it's already mixed. Unfortunate. So I'm not gonna make a short on that. Here we have something called forwards, which I feel like this game is incredibly close to a demo of a game in another game that I've already seen. The backwards level in the beginner's guide. I altered the level, the narrative, and the controls, lighting, and audio that I hope tells one story, its own story, and differentiates itself from that level. Environment feeling is supposed to be that of the Stanley Parable, which has the same developer as the beginner's guide. And in the beginner's guide there is this implication, I believe, if that's the game I'm thinking about, that the developer of the beginner's guide potentially actually stole ideas from somebody else and game concepts from somebody else, unless I'm thinking of a different game, which I might be. But yeah, I knew I'd seen this. So somebody is ripping off potentially somebody who ripped off potentially somebody else. The beginner's guide was never really able to figure out if it was a fictional story of the beginner's guide developer saying that he stole somebody else's idea, or if it was a actual confession. But yeah, I have no reason why I'd want to play forwards, so that's going to be a no. I can't recommend that either. It really is just stealing somebody else's idea, at least on the lowest rung of that level. Like he's stealing the idea from the beginner's guide. This looks like nothing. Infection, crisis, fight for life. Honestly, this is what I would see too. Before we get to a point where toplessness becomes an option for ladies, let's just get to the point in video games where toplessness for guys is considered acceptable. It is shocking how few guys even go shirtless in video games, when it's fairly reasonable that they would, particularly if there's nobody around, particularly if they're struggling to keep shirts from tearing up, or finding replacement shirts. Infectious crisis, fight for life doesn't look like anything though. Here we have a more anime style RPG game called Dungeons Legion, which can't really dismiss it as an RPG Maker game, and noticeably it is already very positive, so I'll give it a chance. Now, noticeably over the weekend, I have gotten a lot more views on my YouTube Shorts ever since things started premiering more, and a lot more comments, and even a couple subscriptions. Now, I don't really want to drink the Kool-Aid and think that something amazing will happen here, but if I got a major snowball effect, it would be nice if all of a sudden I'm getting 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 new subscribers. If I'm getting a lot more people watching videos and a lot more views, that would be great. Does that mean by January 1st I'd be in the YouTube Partner Program and start to make some money off this channel and this long running effort of running it and making a YouTube channel? No, that's not going to happen. I would say best case scenario, if I got really lucky, by the mid 2024 I might start to see a few $100 here or there from YouTube advertisement. You know, unless YouTube just drastically changes how much they pay and what it takes to be a partner, I'm pretty well screwed until then. But ignoring the money aspect there, I do appreciate that with doing premieres and doing the YouTube Shorts, I'm getting more views. Of course, I just have no idea if it's the time of year, or me getting lucky, or if it's actually the content I'm making with the YouTube Shorts. Which, people liking the YouTube Shorts is fine and dandy, but I still would prefer people to like my live streams or my pre-recorded footage a lot more. Obviously going to say no to energy tanks as a game. We have a game called We're Tethered Together, which that's a twist on a precision platformer, so I'll give it a chance. Here we have a game called Slave Princess Fine, Why Did She Sell Out Her Own Kingdom? Which, yeah, looks like an RPG Maker game. Noticeably though, you're going with more of the moe style. I'd say this is definitely closer to moe than the kawaii style in anime. And it is tagged as having nudity in it, and yet, once again, using that tag seems to not really inherently mean it needs to be in the adult section. There isn't any DLC here, and they're saying suggestive content, and the mature content, it's English, Japanese, and Chinese. Now, quality-wise, this doesn't look particularly any better than any other RPG Maker game. It's just weird how there's just no consistency between tags, your self-written mature content description, and whether or not something's in the adult section. Although in all fairness, it doesn't really feel like, by my standards, this would be a game that should be in the adult section. It also feels like a game where they've added extra clothing around the chest of some of these characters to potentially cover them up more and be considered acceptable by Valve standards that are ever shifting. I'm going to leave this on the fall list just to see if it's well received. Here we have a game that's weird. It's called Fast and Blast. It looks like it is just an asset flip garbage game, but weirdly, almost seems like a mistake. The game has been marked as containing frequent nudity or sexual content, and maybe the frequent nudity is the weird point there. But noticeably, there's nothing in this game here that has been indicating any of that. It seems to me like somebody just, when filling out the forms through Steam Direct, clicked the wrong box. And when you look at this like description, it seems like the descriptions are also pretty roughly written. Now, notably, you're not going to get your game to sell more by being in the adult section, particularly if you don't belong there. But can you flag something as it doesn't have adult content? No. There's not a way here to say, hey, this is mislabeled, this information is wrong. Where it would be helpful, frankly, for people to highlight misinformation or incorrect information on a store listing. But nope, game like that is better off just ignored. Yep. Or better off not being on Steam in the first place, I would argue. This game Growers doesn't look like anything. Illuminate Frame 4 doesn't look good enough. Technophobia. Do Androids Go to Heaven? Looks weird, but is it weird enough for me to say yes to? No. Dance Do looks a little weird, but doesn't look like there's quite enough game here, so that's gonna be a no. So next we have an adult game called SUD-OH-KU, so Sudoku furry playtime, and it's seemingly a game where you are doing Sudoku, and then when you finish a Sudoku board, you get a fully nude version of a furry anthropomorphic lady. Seems like it's exclusively ladies, and it seems like as you make more progress on solving a Sudoku, the characters maybe lose some clothes too. There's 5 characters overall. I guess there's a way you could do that, certainly, is if you fill in all the ones out of 1 through 9 in a Sudoku, that would be one level of progress, and then if you fill in all the 2s, that'd be a second layer of progress. Now, the fetish here, as far as furries, is going to limit its fan base, and Sudoku is going to limit its fan base. It's selling for $2.09. It claims to have full audio. I wouldn't assume that there's that good of a visuals on it anywhere. It actually looks pretty awful as far as the visuals. But you also run into a real problem in that the Sudoku puzzles in general, if you're really good at it, you're going to spend 20 minutes in it solving a Sudoku, unless it's fairly easy. If you're average on a Sudoku, you're going to spend 30-40 minutes on it. It seems like that is a lot of gameplay to play compared to something like strip poker per round, taking only a minute or two. Of course, if you were playing a strip poker game, you might end up spending an hour or two to unlock each character. It's just a really long amount of mental energy you're putting into it and time you're putting into it. I don't know if there's really a match there that people want to be mentally challenged before being erotically aroused. Primal Threat here doesn't look like anything. Here we have a game called Samira's House, which I'll say for the most part looks like a horror asset flip game, but I'm gonna give it a chance because it has a decent level of polish in the screenshots. Glassbreakers, Champions of the Moss. Might be something. Planet Surfer. I think we can pass that off as just being another flying game. Asset flip environments where you fly around and do nothing else. Ocean Pressure. Might be something. Here we have a Western animated style game called Chronotopia Second Skin. It's a unique rewriting of the Donkey Skin fairy tale, a darker variant of Cinderella's. Follow Kiona in a painful but ultimately rewarding search for a true self. Even the Donkey Skin story is perhaps not well known these days. Yep. I'll give this a chance. It's a rarity too that you get to see dark-skinned characters in a lot of these visual novels or these games in general. And then we have another adult game. This one is more of a Western style 2D game called Wet Girls. It looks like it's a 2D puzzle game. It's a slightly colorful palette, but I'd still say is still going for very realistic older lady proportions. Doesn't look bad. Of course, you're really getting into a fairly specific fetish of just characters who happen to be wet, and then scenarios around that are not really expanded on. It's just here's a random person in a random place who happens to also be wet in a couple of the screenshots. The game is $1.19. It's English only. Wouldn't expect too many pictures from it, but arguably a 2D puzzle game with a few pieces to solve is probably a lot simpler than a Sudoku game. One of these screenshots has the lady wet on a bed, and yeah, that's certainly going to make a mess with her being dripping wet from head to toe. With water, I would guess is worth pointing out too. There's, I guess, a crossing over there in which somebody could be wet with something else than water, and that gets into other fetishes. Cluckathon looks like it's a 2048 game with chickens, but the problem I would say here is that the visual difference between a chicken at one level and a chicken at a different level doesn't seem to be as good as it should be. Then there's seemingly just a lot of different screens when this probably should be closer to a one-screen game. Yeah, I just don't see a real game there. Not anything fun, at least. So I'm gonna say no. Fortune rewritten. Player versus player experience battle. Head-to-head combat. Only one can be the winner. Well, for what that is described as, this game looks terrible, so I'm gonna say no to that. So far so good. We haven't seen anything that was extremely political coming out on Steam. I imagine Valve is going to definitely say no to anything that's pro Palestine or pro Israel or anti either one of those. I think Valve is going to inherently try to stay out of it and just hope that the whole thing doesn't affect them too much. And you inherently have this problem that it takes a little bit of time to even make an asset flip game, so if something like that was going to happen, it might happen 6 months from now, when possibly the whole relevance of making a game like that will be done with, although probably not. As we're burning through these games more and more, still seeing fairly high amounts of bad games. We'll give the lab a chance. Generally, something called Cozy Hike I would want to give a chance to, but I don't know how you really sell a game like this, even if it's really cheap. If it is just a hiking / walking simulator, you basically need to make the ultimate walking simulator or hiking simulator if you're going to do that. Something that either procedurally generates worlds and paths, or something that tells a amazing story in the whole experience as you're hiking and walking, which I don't think this game is doing either one of those. Let's see, Hell Hunter Anti-Neom doesn't look like anything. Here's the other Arthur game, and see, this was about the point where I think the macro started to mess up, and then I started to manually open all the new tabs. Arthur's Reading Race. Arthur's Teacher Trouble. Each one of those obviously is going to get a YouTube short, which means there will just be 4 Arthur YouTube shorts, but because they have Arthur in the name, they might actually get more views too. I foresee there's a chance in the future when people start Googling things on Steam, I mean not on Steam, on Google, that they will get YouTube shorts recommended to them on top of YouTube videos for a lot of results. And by potentially having successful YouTube shorts now, I could potentially get more views later. That's the hope, at least. Here's basically a game where you're just dropping a nuke, and that's it. Which probably should be a little bit more of a game there, I would say. So I'm going to say no to that. Honestly, if you're going to make a game where you bomb things, then why not just add multiple types of bombs, multiple power efforts. Managing a beehive game. I'm going to give this a chance. But yeah, bombing places over and over again. At a certain level though, if you're going to bomb a place, then you need the place to be running some kind of simulation where once it's bombed, it either grows up stronger or changes in some way. Like, I could see taking the concept of bombing a bunch of places in like a missile defender concept where you're playing as the bad guy, and instead terraform places with like terraforming bombs of sorts. Or you go silly with it and you have like healing bombs or shield bombs, and you're playing player versus player type gameplay. Black hole in the road doesn't look like much of anything. Not too many Halloween games. Here we have a Halloween trick-or-treat game. I'll make a short on that just to see if it gets any views. Mad King Prologue looks interesting, but I don't make shorts on Prologue, so I'm gonna instead try to click on Mad King here and make a short on that, which means I actually need to go back here and not put that on the follow list, and then go back here, just go back and forth a few times. I like the animation here. Of course, as a card game, really is going to have to either get very lucky or have a lot of advertisement behind it for people to start playing it. We really never did see anything really compete against Hearthstone or replace Hearthstone particularly well. Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh's different, Magic the Gathering's different, even Shadowverse is fairly different. Shadowverse, I guess, is the closest comparison. Next we have another adult game, 2D. It looks like, well, let me actually check this now. I'd say it's actually closer to a soft 3D CGI, but very colorful, very anime style. Characters is called Super Pantsu Tintakun, which is, to roughly translate from Japanese as I understand it, it's super underwear tentacle, who I feel fondness for, kun meaning fondness. I feel like I've seen this before. This might have been re-released, where it's like these lockers that have slimy tentacle elements to them, and the characters, the school characters it looks like, or the workers, whatever, are walking past the lockers and getting grabbed by tentacles. Seems like it might even be a bit of strategy, and then there's a whole simulation element on it. And then there's also seemingly a match 3 game here. It's mostly positive at 75% of 24 reviews already, and it's actually already on my follow list, so it must have been in early access, and now they've taken it out of early access, which that never really made a lot of sense anyways to do that. Not sure that the full concept makes a lot of sense though. That you're just grabbing people or grabbing ladies. It's $5.09. Then that linked to me a different game from August 9th, 2023 called Zombie Kini Pinball Z, which, yeah, I think we looked at this before. Which that is also a fairly weird game, in that it's a pinball table with a lady in a bikini, and looks like as you're making more progress, you lose some clothes on the lady in the backdrop of the pinball. The pinball itself doesn't look particularly interesting or good though, but it definitely caught my eye in that there was potentially an adult game with pinball in it. One of the YouTubers I talked about, I watch a lot of, had a had a long video explaining a mechanical pinball and how it worked and how it was wired, which was very interesting. It was about a really long video explaining how mechanical pinball works. This treasure hunt girl is a great example of what almost certainly is an asset flip RPG trial RPG style game. But then it is also selling on some cleavage and scantily cladness. It has nudity as a tag, but it's English and Chinese, which makes me suspect it's really very much just a little bit of skin is showing. Wearing a little exposed is all it says. Please do not play in public. But if there really was anything here to see, you would think it would be in the screenshots, and the only screenshot that even shows a character is this character collector screen, which seems like it is literally not connected in any way to the rest of the game. So yeah, treasure hunt girl is not going to get a yes. Need to hurry up. Money garden, money tree. I'll give that a chance. Project Genius. I don't think it looks animated well enough. Nine Realms Revolt looks nicely polished. I kind of have to remind myself that your average game that's good does look this good. There's so many games that come out on Steam that are just unacceptably poor quality animation. Here we have a game called Fantasy Office, which looks like it's probably a Chinese game. Maybe this is somewhat close to like Papers, Please ripoff. It's free, but it's Korean only. Interesting. So from what it looks like it's kind of a Papers, Please ripoff from a Korean company. Which, yeah, we don't see too much of that, but the more we see of that, the better. That means in general we're likely to see more Korean games made. You kind of have to take the good with the bad. The Shadow Rebirth I would give a chance to, but should I make a short on it? I will. Tales of Everhorn, more of a Western style. You're calling it a JRPG game. I would have thought it was a visual novel. Like every screenshot here is showing fairly nicely animated characters, elves. Doesn't seem like they particularly shy away from getting a little lewd. Now this animation on this face looks awful. There's a little inconsistency there. So I definitely want to give this a chance. The question is, do I want to make a short from it? And you can see this is going the old-fashioned way of having an uncensored patch to put in the adult content. You know what? I'm gonna make a YouTube short, or try to make a YouTube short on this, just to see if it even works. Because I wouldn't be surprised if when my macro tries to make a YouTube short on it, it pops up an age gate, and anything that's age gated doesn't work. I did try to look at that. I didn't get very far with that, and I'm not gonna go back and try and see if I can program around that. Anyways, the problem there is that the age gate is really done by a cookie, whereas the modifications I can do with my recording of making YouTube shorts are just custom style sheets changes. They're visual changes. They're not data changes with what you do with cookies. It's two separate systems, unfortunately. I'm going to say no to leave Panda away. think we can say no to Cart Life. These all do feel like actual games that came out over the weekend. Soulstone of Hope, I think we could probably say no to. We might be seeing slightly more of these RPG Maker MX style games, which is what I suspect this is made in. That look a little bit different. Or we may just be seeing more JRPGs, although weirdly in English only JRPG to me really implies that it is not really being made by anybody Japanese. Here we have a game called Growth. Give that a chance. Alchemist, the Potion Monger. Says VR. No. I'll give that a chance too. I actually just want to wrap up for today, and I'm taking too long. I'm gonna say yes to this too, although the art style seems a little rough. Lixa. I think I want to say no to this. It's just not visually polished enough. 1016. I'm gonna put this on the fault list, but not make a short on it. Outpath. Experimenter clicker-based building game. I'll give that a chance. Might be something around that idea. Probably not. Yeah, if you had the stamina system or some kind of clicker system, something that was in Minecraft, other than just mining forever if you wanted to, I don't think that'd really improve the game in any way. Paradio. Looks like it's just a puzzle game. It doesn't look terrible, so I'll give it a chance. Pork. Doesn't look like anything. Return to Northbury Grove. It's probably nothing. I can tell I'm already mentally exhausted here, and so I'm just saying yes to a lot of things that I would probably say no to. Let's see. Simple game, English and Russian. Full Russian audio. I'm gonna say no to it. Yeah. Night Loops looks weird in a good way. Wizard with a Gun is already on the fall list. Empty Shell. I'm gonna give a chance to. Yeah, almost done. Thank goodness. Balloons. I'm gonna say no to balloons. No, you know what? I'll give it a chance. It's weird. Weird enough. Rethink Light is basically the 4th time they've resold Light. Lite. I'd say the creator of the Rethink series is Flooding Steam, but he's doing it really at the perfect level of pacing. He only puts out like one new game every 6 months, so it's never enough to really get caught or get yelled at for making other games. Although weirdly, you have Rethink, then you have Rethink Evolved, then you have several sequels. So it's like Rethink 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know if they ever made a Rethink 5. But apparently from this list, they're not showing a Rethink 5. And then you have a Rethink Dueled 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And there's slightly different gameplay styles between Rethink and Rethink Evolved, but arguably not enough to justify it. Them both existing, particularly each of them selling, although in all fairness right now a lot of them are selling for 99 cents, $1.99. So the real move would be to play Rethink, see if it's good, and then purchase Rethink Evolved and play it again and see if it's good, which I probably should just buy Rethink Evolved. Now Rethink Lite here saying it's a spiritual successor to Rethink 2 is weird. Does that mean Rethink 3 went in a different direction? I don't know. I won't know probably for a long time, if ever, until I actually play the games. Theoretically, I'll play the first one, find it uninteresting, and never play any of the others, and remove the rest from the wish list. Which that's definitely a case with a lot of the games on the wish list, is that I could play the first in a series, find it completely uninteresting, and never buy any more. Castillo, the 9 circles. So it's like 9 circles of hell that you're doom shooting through. Do I think there's an actual game to play here? Probably not, but yeah, I'm totally mentally drained, so I'm gonna say yes. Unless I can just immediately say no. I'm gonna say yes to everything. Sliding Swords. It's probably a 2048 game. Looks nicely polished for what that could be. Here we have another, I think, Spot the Difference observation duty puzzle game with puzzle game elements. Might be something to that. There was something certainly to the I'm on observation duty concept that was a little lackluster. No real reason to keep going other than to spot the differences. Draft Day Sports Pro Football 2024. I don't even think we are particularly anywhere near draft day in football, but maybe we are. Maybe we're closer than I think. So Rethink Evolved also came out relatively recently. Rethink Evolved 5, I mean. So yeah, he kind of delays delays the release too, between the evolved version and the non-evolved version. But you would think that the evolved would imply that there's just significantly better visuals or things like that, and I don't know if that really is the case. Alright, well, I've set myself up to have a lot of YouTube shorts being made because I went too long and lost mental energy halfway through that. But whatever, that's going to be it for the stream. Over the next couple days, hopefully I can make a lot more progress on the programming. Ideally, it'd be nice if I was done by Wednesday, but depends on just how quick it takes me to actually get things working. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's some links down below. Thank you for watching.